If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, The One with a Cheat. The morning sun had only just climbed over the rooftops when, in a relatively secluded house inside Konoha, Hikaru snapped his eyes open and immediately sat up. He went straight to the mirror. For a brief moment, he honestly wondered if he'd somehow turned into Kakashi Hatake. A handsome face. Silver hair. If his irises weren't brown instead of dark, then with a mask he could probably pass as Kakashi without anyone questioning it too hard. It had been more than 13 years since he'd arrived in this world, and by now, Hikaru had gradually gotten used to everything here. But his luck really wasn't great. He'd transmigrated at the worst possible time. He still remembered the day he was finally old enough to enter the ninja academy. The moment he saw a kid in his class named Kakashi Hatake, and another one named Obito Uchiha, his heart had gone cold. If those two were here, there was only one explanation. His future almost certainly included at least one war on a scale he couldn't imagine. The shinobi of this world were terrifying. Even children. In wartime, kids could kill at 6 or 7 like it was just another lesson. 10-year-olds on the battlefield were normal. And monsters like Kakashi, by 12, he was already a Jonin, hands stained with more enemy blood than most adults would ever see. Hikaru had been a modern person in his previous life. He couldn't do that. At least back then, he didn't believe he could. In front of him, there were only 2 roads. 1. March onto the battlefield like everyone else and pray he survived. 2. Find a way to avoid the front lines, keep his head down, and endure until the war ended, until those 2 so-called saviors rose up and changed the world. Unfortunately, the second path was almost impossible for him. Because his surname was Senju. The Senju name was legendary. It had once stood at the center of the shinobi world's stage. The Senju and the Uchiha built Konoha together. The first Hokage. The second Hokage. Even the third Hokage's era. So much of Konoha's foundation had been shaped by Senju Tobirama's teachings and policies. Among Konoha's current high-ranking ninja, who hadn't been touched by Senju influence in one way or another. Even the Uchiha could only use their power to highlight the Senju's sheer weight. The enormous statues at the Valley of the End, what stood behind them wasn't just history, but Senju glory, and Uchiha humiliation. But the sky could change in an instant. So could people. After the third Hokage took office, the Senju clan began to weaken. The most bitter part? That decline was tied to the second Hokage's policies. Of course, the third Hokage also played a crucial role, no matter how gently he explained it, saying it was only because he hoped the Senju would set an example. In just over a decade, the Senju had almost lost the concept of being a clan at all. Or rather, the Senju could no longer even be called a clan. They had completely dissolved into the masses of ordinary shinobi. Or, put more bluntly, they had become commoners. Some of them rarely even used the name Senju anymore. Take Hikaru, for example. Whether at the academy or in ANBU, he used the name Fukami Hikaru. Honestly, that name sometimes left him speechless. Every now and then, he'd catch himself wondering where his lotus bloom was supposed to be. A small number of people accepted the Senju's fate because they had no strength to resist it. But plenty refused to swallow it. The most typical example was the elder who had raised him. After Hikaru transmigrated, his parents died in the Second Shinobi World War, and he'd been brought up by an old Senju elder. That elder had drilled one idea into him since he was little. You must fight for the revival of the Senju. Hikaru didn't really have much to say about it. Back when the Senju were collapsing, the elder had tried to force that belief onto almost everyone. Still, because of him, there was no way I could slip into some cushy job in the administration department. Hikaru sighed. Even if the Senju were finished as a clan, their connections hadn't disappeared overnight. If the elder had been willing to spend his favors, he could have arranged for Hikaru to be placed in administration. If that was too hard, then at least a teaching track, anything that kept him away from the front lines. But the elder refused. The reasons were simple. First, the Senju were a battle clan. Second, Hikaru was too young, he couldn't go. Instead, the elder had done something else. When Hikaru turned 8, he was pushed directly into ANBU. To be honest, that wasn't any better. ANBU work, was that even meant for humans? And coming to the famous eye world without getting a pair of eyes, even Byakugan would have been nice. After washing up, Hikaru stared into the mirror again and let out another quiet sigh. He knew the story of the shinobi world far too well. In the end, it was basically a tale of an Satsuki family messing with the world, and then tearing itself apart. The strongest cheats here, besides being the reincarnation of Indra and Asura's chakra, were those eyes everyone dreamed of. The Senju bloodline wasn't bad. It was also a descendant line, after all. But a bloodline only mattered if you could awaken it. If you couldn't, it was no different from being ordinary. A cheat that might as well not exist, even if he had access to a tiny bit of Senju training resources. Still, it's not like I have no cheat. It's just hard to explain. He focused on the reflection. The mirror still showed Hikaru's face, but in his vision, lines of numbers appeared like a status screen layered over reality. Name, Senju Hikaru. Gender, male. Birthday, Konoha calendar year 34, March 24th. Rank, Jonin, Chnin. Bloodline development, beginner, Senju secret art. Seeds. Jonin chakra pool seed, 60% mature. Intermediate sage art seed, 80% mature. Advanced earth release seed, 70% mature. Advanced water release seed, 70% mature. Fruits, 0. Quest, become the true big boss of the shinobi world, unique, 1%. That was his cheat, a bizarre interface that was almost like a data sheet. And the cheat itself was weirder than most. He didn't know if it was something the system gave him, or something that came with being reborn into the Senju line, but either way, it felt like he was destined to never escape plants. Through a Senju's secret technique, whether innate or granted, he could absorb the life force of plants and convert it into special attributes. Then the system would turn those attributes into seeds. Those seeds were like the Aberame clan's insects in one way. They had to be fed inside his body. They grew by devouring his chakra. When a seed finally matured, it would produce a fruit. And if Hikaru ate that fruit, he'd gain the corresponding ability. The most important part was he could master those abilities completely, as if they'd always been his own. But those seeds also caused a problem. They made his chakra output look nothing like a Senju's. Even at 13, he hadn't become Chakraton, that absurdly huge pool people joked about. Instead, he was stuck looking like a pretty average Chnin. A weaker one, at that. That was why his rank line read Jonin, Chnin. His actual combat ability was Jonin level, but his chakra reserves were Chnin tier. Now he finally understood what Kakashi's life felt like. Or maybe it was more like being stuck at third stage of Chi. Chapter 2, Kakashi. But still, the next harvest isn't far off. Hikaru glanced at his status screen again, especially the seeds section, and his mood improved noticeably. Even though those things were like parasites constantly devouring his chakra, this situation was partly his own fault. Back when he had first obtained this cheat, his curiosity had gotten the better of him. He'd planted far too many seeds, especially basic attribute ones. The result? He ended up with an excellent physical foundation. Speed, reflexes, and strength were all outstanding, but his chakra reserves were the ones that paid the price. So much so that some clan members had even begun to wonder whether he was really a Senju at all. He had already grown Jonin level and Chnin level chakra fruits, but the higher the seed's tier, the more chakra it consumed and the longer it took to mature. Fortunately, his combat strength wasn't weak. Especially after he'd obtained a sage chakra seed through sheer luck. That alone gave him a far better trump card. Just look at Naruto or Senju Hashirama. One glance was enough to understand how terrifying Senjutsu really was. Even though Hikaru's sage mode didn't belong to any of the three great sage regions, and even though he was only at an early stage level, the boost it provided was already absurd. With that enhancement, he'd avoided countless deadly situations during missions and had even turned the tables to kill powerful enemies. In sage mode, the quality of his chakra increased dramatically, which in turn massively amplified the power of his techniques. On top of that, his resistance to genjutsu, as well as his sensory abilities, saw a clear improvement. Genjutsu was terrifying. In shinobi combat, even a momentary lapse less than a second could mean death. Shinobi were like Ferraris, insanely fast, devastatingly powerful, but fragile. Plenty of famous ninja had died to nothing more than a kunao. Hikaru knew he couldn't do what Might Guy did, reading movements without ever looking into an opponent's eyes. So he desperately needed a reliable countermeasure against genjutsu. And Sage Mode was perfect for that. After putting on his ANBU uniform and swiftly donning his mask, Hikaru left his house. He had a mission today. Being late wasn't an option and ANBU discipline was on an entirely different level. Bounding across rooftops, he quickly arrived at the ANBU compound. After entering and confirming his identity, Hikaru casually found a spot and rested. He didn't know what today's mission would be. All he needed to do was give everything once the order came down. ANBU missions were never disclosed in advance. You only learned the details right before execution. It was standard secrecy protocol. Hikaru had long since gotten used to this. After all these years, he was already acting as a small squad leader. Still, my life as a squad leader is pretty miserable. He sighed inwardly. Look at Uchiha Itachi. Same rank, but he got to slaughter his entire clan with a single order. The current time was late Konoha year 47. The Third Shinobi World War had essentially come to an end. On the grass country front, Minato Namikaze's squad had performed exceptionally well during the Konoha Bridge mission. Although Uchiha Obito was lost, the mission successfully severed the supply line between the land of earth and the land of grass, turning Iwagakure's forces there into stranded ghosts. Forced into a corner, Iwagakure had no choice but to seek a ceasefire. But the terms Konoha offered. Hikaru recalled the decisions made by Hiruzen Sarutobi in the manga and anime. No war reparations. No accountability for Iwa's aggression against Konoha. All captured IWA ninja released. From one perspective, it was a complete betrayal of Konoha's interests. But from Hiruzen's standpoint, it made sense. No one knew how far Iwagakure might go if pushed too hard. If they went insane and decided to fight Konoha to the bitter end, things would become catastrophic. During the Third War, Konoha had clashed with all four major villages in succession. The village was exhausted physically and mentally and its pool of elite ninja was dangerously close to collapse. If IWA went berserk, Konoha simply couldn't hold. More than that, cornering IWA too badly would leave them unable to check Kumigakure, whose military strength and morale were still frighteningly high. Kumo's temporary ceasefire with Konoha was largely thanks to one fact. The Third Reikage had died after being surrounded by tens of thousands of IWA ninja. Using IWA to restrain Kumo, buying Konoha time to recover, that was Hiruzen's strategy. But such a self-sacrificing peace treaty was bound to cause backlash. And so, the third Hokage stepped down. Minato Namikaze officially became the fourth Hokage, and Konoha entered a new era. At least, on the surface. Though this fourth Hokage probably won't last long either. Hikaru was calm about it. And that has nothing to do with me. I'm not an Uchiha. Whoever sits in the Hokage's chair doesn't really affect my missions. That unique quest, become the true big boss of the shinobi world, still sat there, with its vague rewards and punishments unknown. But Hikaru intended to complete it. To do that, he needed to attach himself to a powerful faction, one strong enough to dominate the shinobi world. He had briefly considered cutting loose and joining Obito. After all, they'd been classmates. But after thinking it through, staying in Konoha was the better choice. Whether it was Obito, Uchiha Madara, Black Zetsu, or even Kagaya Tsutsuki. They were all competitors. In the end, they all sought control over the shinobi world. And Hikaru saw no future in being a terrorist. Besides, Konoha still had two children of destiny, the so-called saviors of the ninja world. Honestly, even if Hiruzen had stayed Hokage, that might have been even better for him. Not that Hikaru liked the man. In fact, plenty of Senju wished he were dead. But knowing the plot, Hikaru understood one thing. Hiruzen's end would be lonely. Betrayed by all, dying with no one to help him. Well, almost no one. The only one who tried was stopped by Kakashi. And after Hiruzen? The fifth Hokage would be Tsunade. A Senju. If Hikaru played it safe until then, it was guaranteed profit. Hell, if he performed well enough, maybe he could even take that Hokage seat himself. Becoming an ANBU squad leader already gave him 1% quest progress. So what would becoming Hokage give him? Assembly. As Hikaru waited and thought, a man wearing a dog-faced mask entered the room, followed by a silver-haired figure in a cat mask. Captain. The moment the voice rang out, every ANBU member in the lounge assembled. Less than 30 seconds later, the formation was complete. This is our new member, the captain said calmly. You've probably heard of him. Hatake Kakashi. From today onward, he is one of us. Codename, INU. INU? Kakashi? Hikaru raised an eyebrow. Meeting Kakashi wasn't surprising. But that codename. He couldn't tell whether the captain chose it deliberately, or if it came from Minato himself. Before he could think it through, the captain spoke again. Nightingale. Yes, Captain, Hikaru replied instantly. From now on, he's assigned to your squad. Any objections? No, Captain. Chapter 3, The Mission. White Fang. That codename had once belonged to Kakashi's father. The man who, during wartime, abandoned a mission to save his teammates only for Konoha to suffer defeat on that front, for public opinion to turn into a knife at his throat, and for him to finally take his own life under the weight of it all. What that name meant to Kakashi, Hikaru understood perfectly. He also understood why Kakashi had come to ANBU in the first place. After Minato Namikaze took the Hokage seat, Kakashi was reassigned into ANBU. The reason was simple: he had watched Obito die with his own eyes, and later, with his own hands, he had killed his other teammate. If that kind of blow landed on anyone else, they might not survive it mentally either, let alone someone like Kakashi, whose heart had always been sharper, more sensitive. Right now, Kakashi looked like death had already moved in and started unpacking. He barely gave off the feeling of a living person. Calling him a walking corpse might actually be the most accurate description. Minato didn't want his student to sink, and he didn't want Kakashi to drown forever in the past. So he threw him into ANBU. ANBU missions were heavy, ruthless, constant. There wasn't time to curl up inside your memories and cry. An ANBU required killing enough killing that, eventually, you stopped flinching from it. Only then could Kakashi get used to what had happened. Only then could he keep moving. Still, why shove him into my squad? Hikaru wondered as he accepted the mission scroll, his thoughts turning quietly. Because we used to be classmates. ANBU didn't pause their work over small incidents. No one cared about awkward coincidences. Orders came, and you moved. This mission was straightforward: eliminate an enemy spy who had already been identified, someone embedded in Konoha's network. After the kill, they were to bring the body back. The spy had disguised himself as a Konoha ninja and was currently outside the village on mission. Of course, calling it a mission was generous. He was transmitting information. This kind of assignment was the most basic bread and butter ANBU work. Hikaru had done it at least 50 times over the past 5 years. He could do it in his sleep. The only difference this time was that he had an additional directive. Take Kakashi along. 2-man operation. Hikaru's squad normally had 4 members, but since Kakashi had been inserted into his unit, the other members were reassigned to different duties. And Kakashi needed to learn ANBU procedure fast. Hikaru exhaled silently. Whatever. He's here. If they want him under me, then he's under me. Truthfully, Kakashi and Hikaru weren't as close as people might assume. Yes, they'd attended the academy around the same time, but Kakashi graduated early. Meanwhile, Hikaru had deliberately kept his head down, slipping past the first wave of cannon fodder selection, and then, right before the second wave could sweep him up, he was shoved into ANBU at 8. Aside from less than a year of overlap, they barely had any connection. If anything, he'd had more contact with Obito. Obito had been a bright idiot. Loud, stubborn, strangely warm. In some ways, he reminded Hikaru of what Naruto would be like in the future. Of course, Hikaru couldn't deny that part of his friendliness back then had been practical. Leaving yourself a way out building relationships was never a bad idea. Once they had the order, neither of them wasted a second. They left immediately and headed for the target area. Kakashi stayed silent the entire way, following behind Hikaru like a shadow, as if he didn't care what the mission even was. It made the air feel heavier. Hikaru knew this was the hardest period of Kakashi's life. The guy was basically dead inside. But Hikaru also knew he couldn't afford to ignore him. If Hikaru wanted to survive and rise in Konoha, building a connection with Kakashi was worth it, if only because Kakashi would one day become the teacher of the world's chosen one. After thinking for a moment, Hikaru spoke in the gentlest tone he could manage. Kakashi, it's been a long time. He was wearing a mask, but he was pretty sure his smile underneath it was decent. Kakashi didn't respond. Didn't even glance at him. It was awkward, though at least the mask hid it. So Hikaru kept going. You might not recognize me, but I recognize you. We were in the academy around the same time. You graduated early. I entered ANBU when I was 8. Same cohort. Kakashi finally reacted. He turned his head slightly toward Hikaru. Yet. Hikaru nodded, his voice still calm. I still remember a lot of people from back then. Guy. Kurane. Asuma, and Obito, and Rin. He stopped. His eyes behind the mask lingered on Kakashi for a beat before he continued, slowly, carefully, each word placed like it mattered. It's a shame. But, they were heroes. When I have time, I want to visit their graves. Leave a bouquet. He didn't say anything after that. Kakashi looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Thank you, Captain. Just call me Hikaru. His voice softened further. Do you remember me at all? Truthfully, Hikaru had no idea if Kakashi would. Back in the academy, Hikaru had kept a low profile. He wasn't an Uchiha, so he didn't have to worry about being watched the way they were, but the Senju's situation was delicate too. Still, too low profile and becoming part of a dead last duo with Obito? No thanks. Hikaru didn't have Obito's luck. Obito and Uchiha nobody on the fringe somehow survived until real graduation, even when Konoha was desperate enough to start yanking qualified kids out of school and throwing them onto battlefields early. Then he got a ridiculously good sensei. Then he somehow became a Hokage's disciple. Obito had the mold of a protagonist just with low intelligence and that special Uchiha sickness that made people crack. If Hikaru had performed as badly as Obito at school, he would have died in the first wave of selection. So Hikaru had aimed for a careful middle ground. Better than average, undeniably competent. But not a standout. Not someone anyone bothered remembering. Hikaru. Kakashi seemed to search his memory. After a moment, he shook his head slightly. Sorry. I don't think I paid attention back then. Then, after a pause, he added, but I've heard Guy mention you. Is that so? Hikaru gave a quiet chuckle. Then I owe Guy a thanks. Hikaru's relationship with Guy was decent actually, his relationships with most of Konoha's future pillars were decent. They were of the same generation, and Hikaru intended to keep a footing in Konoha. And honestly, he also had to consider the possibility of running someday. If he ever did, the ones sent to hunt him down might very well be those same familiar faces. Having a good relationship might buy him a softer hand when that day came. After that opening, Kakashi looked slightly more natural. The coldness still clung to him like frost, but at least he could speak now. That alone was an improvement. The two moved fast, chatting lightly as they traveled. Hikaru found himself thinking half amused, half resigned that somewhere in Kakashi's heart, his favorability was probably creeping upward in tiny increments. Plus 0.01. Plus 0.01. Plus 0.01. Because right now, Kakashi's heart was sealed in ice. And breaking ice was never easy. Chapter 4, Kakuzu. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy of towering trees, scattering mottled shadows across the ground. Between trunk and shade, two figures and a dog sprinted along the branches at high speed, leaving streaks of afterimages in their wake. Hikaru and Kakashi had been on the move for a full day now, steadily closing in on the area where their target was supposed to be. For efficiency, Hikaru had Kakashi summon a ninkin to lead the pursuit. The man they were hunting was called Kashiwagi Kawa. On paper, he was a Konoha shinobi war records, a clean resume, the whole thing. But that was only the surface. The real file said he was actually a Tsunagaku ninja. War didn't just kill people, it also tore holes in intelligence networks, gaps big enough to slip an entire identity through. On the battlefield, bodies weren't always recovered. Sometimes you didn't even know whether someone was truly dead. Just look at Obito. In Konoha, he'd become a Sharingan hero. In reality, the bastard was alive and breathing and getting played like a fiddle by Uchiha Madara. So Kashiwagi Kawa was likely the same kind of case, dead during the war, or captured, interrogated until every detail of his identity was squeezed out, and then replaced. For ninja, disguising yourself wasn't hard. Especially for Suna's puppet masters, those people were masters of makeup, masks, and stolen faces. Just then, the dog abruptly halted. Hikaru immediately threw up a tactical hand sign. Behind him, Kakashi stopped on a dime and drew a kunao, posture tightening into a guarded stance. The smell of blood is strong, the ninkin said after sniffing carefully, voice low. And it's your target's scent. A pause. But that guy seems to be dead already. There are other human scents nearby. Other people. Hikaru frowned. He didn't remember this mission being a shared contract. ANBU assignments were typically issued one-to-one. Either an individual received it, or a single squad did. If this job had been handed to them, then under normal circumstances nobody else should have touched it unless command reassigned it, and if that happened, they would have been notified. Hikaru kept his voice steady, gentle as always. The scent trail we're following, it's heading that way. North, the dog answered quickly. After a day together, he'd taken a slight liking to Hikaru. And it's obvious he isn't going back to Konoha. North? Hikaru turned and met Kakashi's gaze. Both of them understood immediately, this wasn't a small problem. They had headed toward the land of rivers, which lay to Konoha's west. If someone were returning to the village, they should be moving east. This direction was completely wrong. There was only one conclusion. Our mission got intercepted. Hikaru let out a quiet sigh. And that means things are probably ugly. Captain, Kakashi asked in a low voice, do you want to abandon the mission? Even though Hikaru had told him to just use his name, Kakashi still called him captain in the field. To him, switching forms of address mid-operation was sloppy. Abandon the mission? Hikaru hesitated. To be honest, he wanted to. Who knew what kind of person they were walking into? But he couldn't. And he definitely couldn't say it out loud. He wasn't Kakashi, he didn't have the fourth Hokage standing behind him. Even if Minato was, in essence, just a figurehead propped up by Konoha's politics, the title still carried weight. People wouldn't easily move against Kakashi. Hikaru was different. A shinobi with no backing had only one path: keep your head down, execute orders, and be a good tool. For a second, a bitter thought slipped through him. Sometimes it feels like the Senju falling into decline is even worse than the Uchiha. The Uchiha were being isolated to the brink of suffocation. Tobirama and Hiruzen's policies had all but pried them away from the village's core. The other great clans had either been pulled in or pressed down by the third Hokage, recruited, pacified, absorbed. With no external allies, the Uchiha were practically cornered beasts. And now that the war was ending, Konoha's upper ranks would inevitably turn their eyes back inward. Worse, the Uchiha themselves were splitting, one faction pushing for peace, the other pushing for a coup. Still, no matter what, as one of Konoha's biggest clans on paper, they could at least shield their own. Hikaru shook his head, then spoke firmly. We'll catch up and take a look. That corpse has secrets. And some of those secrets belong to Konoha. I understand. Kakashi nodded without hesitation and signaled the Ninken. The dog got the message and immediately resumed tracking, leading them onward. To be fair, the Ninken wasn't fearless. In the original timeline, he'd run from danger before. But as a summon, he always had an escape route. He could return to the summoning realm whenever things turned deadly. As they chased, Hikaru's mind raced. Who would intercept an ANBU kill and retrieve mission halfway through? IWA? From the direction, it wasn't impossible. But going north opened up far too many routes. The land of rain, the land of grass, the land of waterfall, all of them lay in that general direction. Places that had been battlefields, turned upside down until the sky and earth blurred together. And ever since the ceasefire with IWA and Minato's rise to Hokage, Konoha's borders had been plagued with attacks, ninja posing as IWA, or Kumo, striking and vanishing like smoke. Who they really were, no one could say. Small countries seeking revenge? Arms dealers who didn't want the war to end, because peace meant no more profit? And if you ignored the small countries altogether, there was still Kumigakure to the north. A village that had never actually signed a formal peace agreement with Konoha. So who is it? Hikaru kept running, thinking, but it was too tangled to untie with guesses alone. And soon, he didn't have the luxury to keep guessing. He sensed movement ahead. Not far away, a lone figure was walking at an unhurried pace. A corpse was slung over one shoulder. Hikaru focused his senses and instantly felt it. Chakra. A massive amount of it. Just in raw volume, it was far beyond Chunin level, and even more oppressive than most Jainin. The stranger was wrapped head to toe in a black cloak patterned with red clouds, face covered as well. Then, as if he'd noticed something, the man turned his head. A pair of calm, indifferent green eyes met Hikaru's direction. And in that instant, Hikaru felt like prey being stared down by a beast. His expression darkened under the mask. He recognized him. No way. This guy is Kakuzu. Chapter 5, That'll cost extra. Hikaru never would have imagined even in his dreams that a routine mission would end with him running into Kakuzu. Missions going sideways was normal. He'd led teams for years and dealt with plenty of unexpected trouble. But something this nasty? This was a first. Hikaru wasn't unfamiliar with Kakuzu in the slightest. Even though it had been almost 14 years since he'd arrived in this world, he'd started making notes early on just in case time dulled his memory. Of course, he didn't leave those notes lying around. He kept them sealed inside a scroll and carried it with him at all times. Whenever he had a spare moment, he'd pull it out and reread it, forcing the details to stay sharp. As a member of Akatsuki, Kakuzu's background and intel were burned into Hikaru's mind. Originally an elite shinobi from Takigakure, he later betrayed his village. Rumor said he once tried to assassinate the first Hokage and survived. As for how he assassinated him, Hikaru had no idea. Maybe he threw a kunai from a kilometer away and called it a day. It was a ridiculous rumor, sure, but Kakuzu's capabilities were very real. He could steal hearts to extend his lifespan, and he could use the chakra nature of those hearts to unleash matching ninjutsu. And beyond that, his taijutsu wasn't weak at all. Oh! Kakuzu swept his gaze back with a quiet chuckle. I'm being followed. I'm curious who exactly is tailing me. Come out on your own, or do I drag you out? As he spoke, he casually tossed the corpse off his shoulder, letting it hit the ground with a dull thud. At the same time, chakra began to gather around him, dense, ominous. Kakashi frowned. The man felt wrong, like something stitched together and wearing human skin. And even through Hikaru's mask, Kakashi could tell his captain was tense. Captain, Kakashi asked softly as he motioned for Pakun to withdraw, you know him? I do. Hikaru nodded, one hand sliding to the hilt of his short sword. His name is Kakuzu. A bounty hunter. He lives in the underground markets. Near perfect mission success rate. Troublesome. Dangerous. That was all Hikaru could say. Those were public facts. ANBU could pull that kind of intel easily. As for the rest, he didn't dare bring it up. Not the fact that the cloak Kakuzu wore was the uniform of the most notorious terrorist organization in the shinobi world. Not the fact that he had multiple hearts, and killing him once meant nothing unless you destroyed them all. Not the fact that he could likely use multiple chakra natures, possibly even all of them. I see. Kakashi gave a small nod, then spoke without hesitation. Captain, if we fight, I'll handle him. You take the body. Deal. Hikaru answered immediately, almost too pleased. There's really a deal like this? Kakashi would eventually be the man who brought Kakuzu down. Sure, the Kakashi of today couldn't compare to the one more than a decade later. Experience, physique, chakra control, even how he used his Sharingan. But still, Kakuzu had a special kind of bad luck where Kakashi was concerned. Even if Naruto ended up stealing the finishing blow in the future, Kakuzu dying with Kakashi present felt like fate. A built-in debuff. A Kakuzu killer buff. But that wasn't the point right now. Kakuzu's chakra pressure was rising. He was right on the edge of striking. Hikaru didn't want to trade blows with a monster like this if he could avoid it. So negotiation was the obvious first step. With a light leap, Hikaru and Kakashi dropped from the treetops and landed on the ground below. Hikaru walked forward calmly and stopped about 5 meters from Kakuzu. Oh! Kakuzu lifted an eyebrow. Those green eyes were cold as grave glass. ANBU. Judging by your gear, you're a leaf. You want that guy? He flicked a finger at the corpse on the ground. Kashiwagikawa, long dead. Only now, the man's face had changed. A different face entirely. Yes, Mr. Kakuzu. Hikaru kept his voice warm and polite. We do want him. If you're willing to help us, we'd appreciate it. Help? Kakuzu let out a scornful laugh. I'm not a charity. Do you have any idea how much trouble it was to kill him? And besides, he wasn't a Konoha ninja, was he? We're willing to pay. But he's our target. Kakashi cut in, voice flat and sharp as ice. We're taking him back. Dead or alive. The moment those words left Kakashi's mouth, Hikaru's face went dark under his mask. Being firm wasn't the main issue. The problem was the certainty Kakashi broadcast, like there was no negotiation, no alternate outcome. In most situations, that was fine. Here? It was a disaster. ANBU hunted targets for all kinds of reasons: traitor executions, assassinations. And the messy one, cleaning out spies. Oh! Kakuzu's eyes brightened for a fraction of a second. Then they sharpened into something dangerous. So you want to fight, kid? Mr. Kakuzu, don't get angry. Hikaru immediately yanked Kakashi behind him and spoke quickly, still wearing that gentle tone like armor. You're right, you're not a charity. So we'll pay the market rate for his head. How about that? Market rate? Kakuzu looked genuinely amused, like Hikaru had told him a joke. You think I'm stupid? Thanks to the brat beside you, I understand exactly what's going on. That man was a spy, wasn't he? And he's carrying leaf intelligence. If I leak that information, do you have any idea how many people will pay extra to buy his head? Market rate. He laughed again, colder this time. Do you think that makes sense? What do you want, then? Hikaru asked, not showing any irritation. He shot Kakashi a silent glare, then turned back, still polite. Simple. Kakuzu's expression suddenly became solemn, dead serious. He spoke each word slowly, as if announcing a sacred law. Then you pay extra. Hikaru froze for a heartbeat. Staring at Kakuzu's utterly sincere face, he almost wondered if this bastard was a transmigrator too. But when Hikaru thought about it, Kakuzu saying this was the least surprising thing in the world. The man had lived too long. He'd lost interest in everything else. Only money still made him feel alive. In his eyes, there was nothing left but profit. Hikaru drew in a slow breath. Without letting his voice change, he subtly moved one hand behind his back and flashed Kakashi a tactical sign. Then, still calm, he said, Mr. Kakuzu. Konoha rarely negotiates like this. So you do want to fight? Kakuzu's voice dropped into a cold, killing tone. ANBU are annoying, but even annoying people have bounties. That depends, Hikaru replied evenly, yet his chakra was already gathering too, coiling and tightening like a drawn bowstring. In the next instant, Kakashi burst forward from behind him and snapped his wrist, sending several kunai flying straight at Kakuzu. And Hikaru moved at the same time. But he didn't charge Kakuzu. He shot toward the corpse. Chapter 6, Coordination. Kakuzu didn't flinch in the slightest when two-leaf ANBU suddenly struck. Maybe he'd expected it. Konoha didn't negotiate with bounty hunters over things like this, not seriously. And even if Konoha did want to talk, Kakuzu wouldn't. He'd thought he was simply killing a Konoha ninja with a decent bounty. Only after the job was done did he realize the truth: this leaf shinobi was actually from Tsunagakure. More importantly, the reward posted for the man wasn't bad at all. At first, Kakuzu hadn't bothered thinking too deeply about why someone wearing leaf gear would be disguising himself as a leaf ninja. Maybe it was just to avoid trouble while operating inside the land of fire. But now he understood. This man had been planted in Konoha as a spy. He'd been exposed, ANBU had been sent to erase him, and by pure coincidence Kakuzu had stumbled onto the situation first. So he knows leaf intelligence. Kakuzu was practical to the bone. He didn't care about the 5 great nations. If he did, he wouldn't have ever joined something like Akatsuki. If I sell this corpse as important intel, it'll fetch an even higher price. So why would I hand it back to Konoha alone? His hands clasped together. Chakra surged violently inside him, and in the next instant a scorching presence rolled outward. Fire release, searing migraine. Katon, Zukoku. A torrent of flame erupted, melting the kunai in midair and sealing off Hikaru and Kakashi's forward path. Hikaru had no choice but to snap through hand seals. Water release, water formation wall. Sujin Hiki. A thick curtain of water surged up, colliding head-on with Kakuzu's fire. But Hikaru's water wall couldn't truly stop that level of flame. In an instant, massive steam exploded outward, blanketing the forest in a choking white fog. Hikaru leapt up immediately and darted sideways, using the mist to break the line of fire while closing the distance. He knew exactly how strong Kakuzu was. A man who'd lived that long didn't just have terrifying chakra reserves. His chakra quality, his combat sense, his experience, all of it was monstrous. Hikaru didn't believe he and Kakashi could win. He'd attacked for one reason only. To give themselves a reasonable excuse to retreat. They were leaf ANBU. And Hikaru had a future to consider. He couldn't afford to be seen as someone who ran at the first whiff of danger. Try to snatch the body back. If that fails, run. Hikaru's plan was clean and simple. Kakashi, however, didn't know what was in his captain's head. Protected by the water release, Kakashi avoided the blaze, and the moment the steam rose he accelerated, cutting to the side. Without meaning to, he and Hikaru formed a pincer angle on Kakuzu. As he sprinted, the short sword strapped across his back was already sliding free. Kakashi swung hard one brutal slash straight at Kakuzu's torso. Clang! The harsh ring of metal echoed through the fog-soaked forest. Kakashi's eyes narrowed. Kakuzu had blocked the blade with one hand. How tough is his body? He didn't get time to think. Kakuzu gave a small shove. And a terrifying force blasted through the contact point, sending Kakashi flying backward. But Kakashi had survived the battlefield for years. His instincts were sharp. He forced his body stable midair, then rode the momentum into a backward flip, aiming to land on a nearby tree. Kakuzu didn't intend to let him go. But as he reached out, his peripheral vision caught something. The other ANBU was already closing in on his loot. Humph! Kakuzu clicked his tongue and abandoned Kakashi for the moment. He turned sharply toward Hikaru. A fist wrapped in black threads detached at the wrist, snapping free like a launched weapon, and shot toward Hikaru with a violent crack of air. Hikaru's reaction was instantaneous. No Sharingan. No perfect read of trajectory. But years of planting trees inside his own body, especially those early attribute fruits, had given him reflexes that were anything but normal. He twisted slightly. The punch screamed past his shoulder and slammed into the ground. Stone exploded upward in a spray of debris. Hikaru used that opening to hop aside, then his blade flashed like lightning, slicing clean through the black threads. With Hikaru buying him time, Kakashi managed to land on the treetop. His eyes flicked to his sword. A small chunk of the edge was missing. Cracks spider-webbed down toward the hilt. Kakashi's brow furrowed. His body, is that earth release? So that's it. Earth release for defense, fire release for offense. He really was a genius. Just one brief exchange, and he'd already peeled back part of Kakuzu's kit. If it was earth release defense, then Kakashi was confident he could break it. His hands flew through seals. Blue lightning gathered in his palm, arcs snapping and crawling across his skin. And then that shrill, bird-like screech burst into life. Chidori. Lightning release countered earth release, and Chidori's piercing power was infamous. Kakashi wasn't worried about failing to crack the defense. Hikaru didn't even need sensory skills to notice it. That sound was impossible to miss. So much for an assassination technique. With that noise, you're basically announcing it to the whole forest. Hikaru shook his head internally. In the future, Kakashi's Chidori became silent until the moment it landed. Kakuzu would only hear the scream after being hit. That meant future Kakashi had refined the technique repeatedly. Right now, he hadn't. Still, the power was the power. Hikaru decided to coordinate. Kakashi had Obito's Sharingan, his tracking and lock-on would be fine. All he needed was for Kakuzu's attention to be split. Hikaru stopped retreating and stepped forward, closing the gap. He was Jonin level at best. Compared to a veteran cage-class monster like Kakuzu, the gap was obscene. But Kakuzu wasn't going all out yet. That gave them a chance. If they could make Kakuzu pay even a little, it would already be a win. Childish. Kakuzu had heard the Chidori's scream too. He understood immediately and felt, for a moment, like he'd just hit the jackpot. That was Chidori. And the one using it had to be Hitaki Kakashi. A bounty worth 10 million RY and more. He was just about to turn his focus back to Kakashi when that other white-haired brat closed in again, clearly trying to coordinate. Kakuzu's annoyance spiked. This kid thinks he can break my earth release defense? Ridiculous. But a heartbeat later, Kakuzu's expression shifted. Hikaru suddenly sprang high into the air. And the blade in his hand began to spin, chakra compressing along its edge, water nature twisting into something razor-thin and murderous. Water release, water blade slash. Suten, Sujin Zanjiki. Chapter 7, A Well-Practiced Hand. This is Senju Hikaru's technique. Kakuzu had lived a very long time. Long enough that he was familiar with many figures and events in the shinobi world. Back then, he had attempted to assassinate the first Hokage, and naturally, that meant he'd crossed paths with the second Hokage, Senju Tobirama, as well. Tobirama was known as the fastest shinobi of his era, a title that was only now beginning to be challenged by some upstart from the new generation. Even so, Kakuzu could never forget that man. And aside from the mysterious Flying Thunder God technique, Tobirama's greatest specialty had been water release and various forbidden and secret techniques. His water release, in particular, had left an indelible mark on the shinobi world. Ordinary water techniques were nothing special, but the techniques Tobirama developed himself were absurdly powerful. They emphasized one defining trait: extreme compression, turning water into something with terrifying piercing and cutting power. After Tobirama's death, water techniques like that had become exceedingly rare. They were simply too distinctive. Which was why, the moment this white-haired brat made his move, Kakuzu recognized it. Since it was a second Hokage technique, Kakuzu didn't dare take it lightly. He immediately surged chakra through his body, and his skin tone deepened as dense earth release chakra gathered across him. Just as he completed the technique, Hikaru's water blade slash came down. Clang! The sound of metal crashing against metal echoed through the forest. Kakuzu merely raised his right arm and blocked the attack completely. Hikaru's blade couldn't press down another inch. Compressed water chakra spun wildly along the sword's edge, sparks flying where steel met hardened flesh. This guy's earth release control is ridiculous. Hikaru felt a numbing shock run up his arm, his brow twitching. Over 13 years in this world, he'd spent at least half of them planting basic attribute fruits. The process had been painful and inefficient, but the results were undeniable. He'd invested most heavily in coordination, speed, and reaction time. Strength had been slightly lower priority, but he hadn't neglected it either. Speed, reflexes, coordination, those were the core markers of high-level taijutsu potential. And as a kid, Hikaru had once fantasized about mastering Flying Thunder God, so of course he'd trained his body accordingly. Even though the Senju clan had declined, it had left behind plenty of valuable material. Some was handed over to Konoha, but Hikaru had his own copies. His raw strength might not have been extraordinary, but it was on par with grown adults. Otherwise, there was no way a 13-year-old with mediocre bloodline development and subpar chakra reserves could possess Jonin-level combat ability. And yet, even with ninjutsu enhancement, even going all out, he couldn't cut through Kakuzu's defense. That was absurd. Before Hikaru could dwell on it, movement in his peripheral vision snapped his attention back. The fist whose threads he'd severed twitched slightly. Without hesitation, Hikaru activated body flicker. The instant he vanished, that detached fist erupted from the ground and smashed into the spot where he'd just been standing. So it really is Earth Grudge Fear. I already sensed chakra underground, this bastard really is vicious. Hikaru cursed inwardly. By the time he landed, his hands were already flashing through seals. Water release, water severing wave. A razor-straight jet of ultra-high pressure water blasted from his mouth, compressed to the extreme and sharpened into a lethal water blade. At this point, Kakuzu was certain. This white-haired brat was absolutely connected to Senju Tobirama. These techniques were exactly the second Hokage's signature moves. A descendant? Or a prodigy Konoha deliberately raised? Kakuzu considered it briefly but didn't dwell on it. The technique was troublesome, yes, but still not enough to shatter his defense. Not the white-haired brat's water release. And not the other kid Kakashi either. Since this is getting interesting, I'll play around a bit more. Then I'll deal with Kakashi and collect another hefty bounty. Kakuzu didn't move. And as expected, events unfolded just as he predicted. Hikaru's water-severing wave was powerful, but he wasn't using Sage mode, and his overall strength was still only Jonin level. Breaking Kakuzu's defense was unrealistic. The jet sliced apart the black threads again before slamming squarely into Kakuzu's body. This time, Kakuzu was pushed back a step. Cracks spread across his chest. But that was all. Shinobi defenses were generally weak, but earth release specialists always developed body-enhancing defensive techniques, especially ones applied directly to themselves. And someone who had lived as long as Kakuzu had perfected self-protection to an extreme degree. In the original timeline, once Kakuzu lost his earth nature heart, he had very little resistance left. After that, even ordinary attacks could kill him. And in canon, it was Kakashi's lightning release that destroyed your strongest defensive heart. Watching Kakuzu fight with a casual, almost playful attitude, Hikaru smiled slightly. Because Kakashi was in position. Kakuzu suddenly frowned, sensing something off. But Hikaru abruptly cut off his technique and used body flicker again, closing in and forcing Kakuzu to focus on him instead of searching for Kakashi. Kakuzu's eyes widened. The piercing screech of Chidori, the violent pain in his chest, and the numbing paralysis that followed. He looked down in disbelief at the hand that had pierced straight through his torso. He'd underestimated them. These two brats actually knew how to work together. Kakuzu wouldn't truly be harmed, but losing his earth release heart still filled him with rage. Unfortunately, full body paralysis meant he couldn't act immediately. Hikaru, who had originally been charging toward Kakuzu, instantly changed direction. In one smooth motion, he rushed to the corpse, swung his blade, and cleanly severed the head. The movement was fluid, practiced, clearly not his first time dealing with this kind of situation. No hesitation. No wasted motion. He flashed Kakashi a tactical hand sign, grabbed the head, and turned to flee, leaving behind only a black blur vanishing into the forest. Both Kakashi and Kakuzu froze for a split second. Kakashi recovered first, yanking his hand free from Kakuzu's chest and immediately chasing after Hikaru. Kakuzu, on the other hand, was completely dumbfounded. Even after switching hearts, the lingering paralysis prevented him from giving chase right away. By the time he recovered, the two ANBU were long gone. Staring at the empty forest, Kakuzu's face twisted. Just what kind of bastard did those brats crawl out from? Chapter 8, The Spy. Late at night, inside a mountain cave somewhere in the Land of Fire, Kakashi and Hikaru sat facing each other. They'd spent the entire day running. By now, they had reached the town closest to Konoha, but Hikaru had no intention of entering it. After all, they had just stolen a head right out from under Kakuzu's nose. Not figuratively. Literally. And Hikaru didn't believe for a second that Kakuzu would swallow that humiliation. Even if they'd moved fast, Hikaru was convinced a man who valued money like oxygen wouldn't let them go. Kakuzu chasing them down was almost guaranteed. The only reason they'd managed to snatch the objective was because Kakuzu had been careless. He hadn't taken Hikaru and Kakashi seriously at all. That was the only opening they got, the only reason the mission was even salvageable. But if Kakuzu caught up, then they'd be facing a Kakuzu who fought seriously. And Hikaru didn't think the two of them could survive that. So they didn't enter the town. They wiped their trail along the way. Erased tracks, masked scents, doubled back. They even used shadow clones to take detours and throw off pursuit. For a man who'd fought on battlefields for nearly 9 years, and another who'd spent close to 6 in ANBU, this kind of thing was routine. Still, Kakashi looked unconvinced. As he slowly stirred a cup of instant rations, he glanced at the cave entrance, where a Ninken stood guard, and finally spoke. "Captain, isn't this a bit too cautious?" "This is rest time," Hikaru said, stretching lazily. His voice stayed mild. "Call me Hikaru. And no. Being careful is never wrong. Not when the thing behind you isn't ordinary. But he's dead, isn't he?" Kakashi frowned. That man had been pierced clean through the heart by Chidori. Kakashi didn't believe someone could keep living after that. Shinobi weren't made of iron. Even Senbon could kill if they hit the vital points. No exceptions. No miracles. Dead. Hikaru shook his head lightly, the gentleness on his face unchanged. "Kakashi, that man isn't dead." He paused, watching Kakashi's expression shift as he prepared to question him. Hikaru smiled and raised a hand slightly, as if to stop him. "Confused? Honestly, you only just joined ANBU. Normally you'd be made to study intelligence files first, then eased into missions gradually. I don't know if this was the 4th Hokage's call or the captain's decision, but you came straight out with me on an operation. Kakuzu is extremely dangerous. According to recorded intel, he once faced 6 elite Jonin each with a black market price tag above 30 million and wiped them all out. In that same operation, he was stabbed through the heart. And the result? He walked away, cashed out, and traded at the underground exchange for nearly 200 million RY. Hikaru spoke slowly, letting each line land. You did pierce his heart. But I don't believe a man like that dies easily. Kakashi listened carefully. When Hikaru mentioned normal ANBU procedure, he watched Kakashi's reaction on purpose. Inside the cave, both of them had removed their masks, but Kakashi still wore his usual cloth face covering. Unfortunately, Hikaru didn't see any particular change in Kakashi's eyes. Calm. Flat. To be honest, Hikaru had been hoping for at least a flicker anything. But when the numbers came out, Kakashi finally showed a hint of reaction. Surprise at Kakuzu's strength. And more importantly, surprise at the idea that someone could survive a heart strike. Kakashi wasn't stupid. He'd already noticed Kakuzu hadn't been taking them seriously in the fight. Kakuzu had treated them like kids trying to bite a tiger. If that man was still alive, and Kakashi kept thinking he'd killed him, the consequences were ugly. Kakashi nodded slowly. I understand, Captain. Then he corrected himself, almost automatically. So, you cut off the target's head while he was paralyzed, and withdrew immediately. Exactly. Hikaru smiled. Even if things went wrong, you'll understand this better once you go back and read more intel. It makes a difference in the field. Because intelligence was everything. In the shinobi world, if you understood your enemy while they knew nothing about you, you held the advantage. Sometimes, that advantage was enough to kill someone far stronger than you before they ever realized what had happened. And Hikaru wasn't making this up. Those details existed in ANBU records. They were just scattered across fragmented reports, buried in minor files easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. Hikaru only dared to speak so confidently because he was sure he'd seen those snippets before. He wasn't worried Kakashi would fail to find them once they returned. Kakashi nodded and fell silent again. Hikaru kept his expression warm, but inside he let out a quiet sigh. Why don't you follow the thread? Why don't you ask yourself why you were thrown into live missions the moment you stepped into ANBU? But Kakashi didn't go there. And Hikaru wasn't going to spell it out. He'd guided Kakashi this far for one reason only, to give him a warning. ANBU water is deep. And you might not be able to keep your footing. Minato had only just taken the Hokage seat. He didn't have a stable base of power yet. Inside Konoha, a lot of control still sat in the hands of the old guard. If nothing else, ANBU still answered the third Hokage's voice. Even ANBU's higher command remained filled with Hiruzen's most loyal people. This period was sensitive. Minato had a perfectly reasonable excuse to bring Kakashi into ANBU, but it still poked at nerves. In the eyes of some people, Kakashi's transfer wasn't about helping a grieving student at all. It was a signal. A hand reaching for ANBU authority. Too impatient. Too eager. And that was exactly why Kakashi had been given a welcome gift the moment he arrived, a hard little shove to remind him where he stood. Hikaru shook his head, indifferent. If Kakashi didn't realize it now, then fine. He could always remind him later more gently, more friendly. As for the power struggle between the third and fourth, Hikaru didn't care much. If he had to gamble, he'd actually rather bet on the third. That old man still had more than a decade left. The fourth? At most, a little over a year. But if this created some turbulence early, stirred some conflict sooner than expected, Hikaru didn't consider it a bad thing. Because somewhere back in Konoha, there were people who would love nothing more than to see the third Hokage fall. And in a way, Hikaru was a spy too. As ANBU, I spend my days cleaning out spies, Hikaru thought, eyes half-lidded. But you people, you never considered it, did you? I'm one as well. Chapter 9, Persona. Hikaru was, in a sense, a spy. Not the kind planted by another village but a clan spy. In some ways, he resembled the future Uchiha Itachi. The difference was that Hikaru had never become a true double agent. Perhaps the third Hokage felt a trace of mercy. Or perhaps he believed the Senju had already declined so far that they could no longer stir up any real trouble. Either way, Hikaru's entry into ANBU had been smooth. But he never believed for a moment that Konoha's upper ranks were ignorant of who he really was. The elder who raised him had used connections that were, on the surface, trustworthy, but Hikaru would never insult the village's rulers by assuming they were fools. They could see everything. Or they could pretend to see nothing. The only question was which option served their interests better. After a solid night's rest, Hikaru and Kakashi rose early. According to the Ninken's report, there had been no incidents overnight. Either Kakuzu hadn't caught up, or he'd lost the trail entirely. Either way, for now, they were safe. They erased the last traces of their presence and quickly headed back to Konoha. ANBU didn't return via the same routes as ordinary ninja. Konoha had more than one entrance, only the others weren't guarded by regular shinobi. Those checkpoints were manned almost exclusively by ANBU or route. No one else was allowed through. After a round of inspections, Hikaru and Kakashi passed smoothly into the village. But as they approached the ANBU compound, Hikaru suddenly stopped. "What is it, Captain?" Kakashi asked, confused. Hikaru thought for a moment before lowering his voice. After the mission is closed and we're dismissed, you're going to see the 4th Hokage, aren't you? Kakashi frowned. He didn't quite understand where this was going. Still, Hikaru's tone remained as gentle as ever, warm, calm, unthreatening. Combined with the mild smile he always wore when unmasked, it was the kind of presence that naturally put people at ease. After a brief pause, Kakashi nodded seriously. In that case, Hikaru said quietly, placing a hand on Kakashi's shoulder, try not to mention what I told you last night, especially the first part. If you have to report it, submit it in writing. Don't say it out loud. And tell the Hokage one thing for me. His actions have been misunderstood. With that, Hikaru fell silent and walked on as if nothing had happened. Kakashi was left standing there, completely at a loss. He had no idea what Hikaru meant and no real way to ask. He could tell his captain wouldn't explain. Worse, Hikaru might just look at him blankly and ask, "What are you talking about?" Still full of questions, Kakashi followed Hikaru to settle the mission. Because of the mission's unusual circumstances, they'd only brought back a head. The ANBU captain overseeing the debrief was clearly displeased. But he didn't blame Kakashi. Instead, he criticized Hikaru. According to him, Hikaru was an ANBU elite, and with a prodigy like Kakashi under his command, this kind of outcome shouldn't have happened. Hikaru didn't argue. He accepted the fault calmly, saying it was his responsibility and had nothing to do with Kakashi. Then he delivered a detailed mission report. And the moment Kakuzu was mentioned, the captain frowned deeply. That legendary bounty hunter? If they'd truly run into Kakuzu, then recovering the target's head could already be considered a perfect completion. With that realization, the captain dropped the issue. In truth, he hadn't really intended to make things difficult for Hikaru in the first place. But watching all this unfold, Kakashi felt a strange chill. Hikaru's earlier words echoed in his mind. He didn't fully understand, but he wasn't stupid. It seemed the pressure hadn't really been aimed at Hikaru at all. It had been aimed at him. After the paperwork was done, Hikaru and Kakashi left the ANBU compound together. They exchanged few words before parting ways. Watching Kakashi's back disappear, Hikaru finally let the gentle expression fade beneath his mask. He'd worn that warmth for so long that even he sometimes believed it was real. But someone who'd spent years in ANBU. How could he possibly be kind? A single day working alongside Kakashi, feeling that suffocating coldness, despair, and lack of vitality had left even Hikaru struggling to keep smiling. He shook his head. Kakashi's current state was terrible. But precisely because it was terrible, it created opportunity. He's the teacher of a future savior. And Minato's disciple. If he hadn't been assigned to my squad, fine. But now that he is, doing nothing would be a waste. Hikaru steadied his breathing. Behind the mask, the gentle smile returned. Even if no one could see it, maintaining the habit mattered. If he truly intended to become the greatest boss in the shinobi world, then he had to step onto the center stage of this turbulent era. And to do that, he needed a persona. He had no intention of copying Uchiha Madara's image, cold, tyrannical, ruling subordinates through fear and brute force. That was the classic villain archetype. Hikaru didn't think he was a good person. ANBU work wasn't meant for good people. 5 years of blood and shadows had burned that illusion away. But that didn't stop him from playing one. His ideal template was the first Hokage, and the fourth. Strong. Bright. Humble. Firm when necessary. Low-key when not. That was the role Hikaru had chosen, and he'd committed to it completely. And it worked. Among former classmates and within ANBU, his reputation was excellent. His squad trusted him completely, the kind of people who'd help count the money after he sold them out. Too bad Kakashi's been added, Hikaru thought mildly. That means someone has to leave. He didn't dwell on it. His squad members weren't famous. Their abilities were average at best, mostly orphans. But they were loyal. Reliable. The only problem was that every one of them carried the third Hokage's label. That's fine, Hikaru decided. With Kakashi here, a few things can finally change. He lifted his gaze toward the Hokage rock, the smile beneath his mask widening. Warning the fourth and Kakashi. Helping the clan. And helping myself. One move, two gains. Chapter 10, A Gift. Those are the details. That's all. Inside a house in Konoha's civilian district, Hikaru spoke evenly to the old man seated before him. The place felt ancient, almost stubbornly so, completely at odds with Konoha's modern styles. The moment you stepped inside, history pressed down on you. It was said this house had been built during the Senju clan's golden age. Even after the clan's decline, it had been preserved. Hikaru hated coming here. Everything about it reeked of decay. Like someone was still drowning in past glory, refusing to step out and face reality. It was sad. And it suited the old man perfectly. Unfortunately, Hikaru didn't have a choice. After missions, he either submitted intelligence through proper channels, or he came here to report. Tonight was the second option. And what he reported wasn't just mission details, it was everything: ANBU internal matters, field events, every scrap of information, no matter how small. Because at the end of the day, he really was a spy. Now he'd finished explaining this mission in full, the clash with Kakuzu, the retrieval, and even the words he'd spoken to Kakashi afterward. You handled it well. The elder fell silent, thinking for a long while, before finally nodding with genuine approval. But your traces were a bit too obvious. The fourth Hokage and the third Hokage may have distance between them, but Minato is still Sarutobi's grand disciple. Still, I've also heard the fourth isn't having an easy time. And ANBU remains entirely loyal to Sarutobi. Taking that into account, your move was a little forward. But if it can be interpreted as a friendly warning, it's acceptable. He lifted his eyes, gaze sharpening. Never forget, when interests are involved, people don't have much room left for reason or gratitude. Hikaru nodded lightly. He didn't like this old man, this living relic who clung to yesterday and preached revive the Senju like a prayer. But the elder was strange. Half the time, he seemed muddled. The other half, he was painfully clear-eyed. And he was right. When interests were at stake, gratitude and rationality often meant nothing. Minato might still believe in things like gratitude. After all, his Hokage seat had come because Sarutobi chose him, giving up on Orochimaru and pushing Minato forward instead. Minato couldn't not feel thankful. And he was thrown into the job abruptly, without the experience or time to build his own faction. So he wouldn't dare make big moves. He would follow Sarutobi's arrangements, step by step. Minato might be obedient, but Sarutobi's interest group wouldn't trust that obedience. A power block was never just one man. Sarutobi might be the face of it, but his responsibility was to balance the group's internal interests, keeping everyone fed, satisfied, invested. In simple terms, even if Sarutobi himself didn't think Kakashi joining ANBU was a big deal, his people might see it as a signal. A signal that the fourth Hokage intended to reclaim ANBU authority. That was why ANBU's atmosphere toward Kakashi was hostile. That was why certain things happened as soon as he arrived. All right, the elder said at last, clearly done with the topic. That's enough for today. For the time being, keep a certain distance from Kakashi. Don't cut him off. Don't alienate him. Just, keep it measured. I trust you know how to do that. Yes, elder. Hikaru smiled politely, stood, and bowed slightly. Then I'll take my leave. Go. The elder took a slow sip of tea, then added casually, oh, someone has delivered a gift to you. Take a look when you get back. Yes, elder. Hikaru smiled again and stepped out. He closed the door gently, then walked away without looking back. He remembered the elder's words, though only as words. The two of them were different. Their goals overlapped, but they were not the same. Still, Hikaru was grateful. He had his cheat, yes, but without a stable environment, he never would have made it this far. I should go back and think through my next steps. Kakashi's in ANBU now. Some things I can't keep delaying. And what exactly is this gift the elder mentioned? Lord Hokage, that's the situation. Inside the Hokage's office, Kakashi knelt on one knee and reported everything about the mission he'd carried out alongside Hikaru. Not everything, though. He kept certain parts to himself, especially some of the words Hikaru had said. He remembered them, but he didn't speak them aloud. Minato frowned at first, then his expression softened into a warm smile. Didn't I tell you? Just call me sensei. He sighed, amused. Forget it. I didn't expect your first mission to run into an opponent that troublesome. Yes. Kakashi lowered his head, voice cool and steady. Hikaru said we couldn't defeat him. But we completed the mission. Fukami Hikaru. Minato smiled. He was your classmate, wasn't he? Learn from him. All right. Go rest. Yes, Lord Hokage. Kakashi stood, hesitated, then pulled out a scroll and offered it to Minato. This is the detailed written report from the mission. Then, I'll take my leave. Before Minato could respond, Kakashi turned and walked out. Minato stared after him, a little puzzled. Kakashi had already given him a full oral report, hadn't he? Why hand over a written one too? Wasn't that redundant? But Minato didn't show his confusion. He calmly took the scroll. During Kakashi's report, Minato had already sensed something faintly off. By normal ANBU procedure, Kakashi should have studied intel and learned protocol before being sent out. Minato had never served in ANBU, but that didn't mean he didn't know how it worked, especially not now, as Hokage. At first, he'd considered a simple explanation: maybe ANBU believed Kakashi's combat strength made him more useful in the field than in a classroom. But Kakashi's odd behavior just now, it made Minato feel he should think deeper. So he opened the written report. And as he read, his expression gradually changed. When he finished, Minato closed the scroll with a soft snap. His face looked complicated. After a long moment, he let out a quiet sigh. So this is a gift. Chapter 11, The Stage. Kakashi's scroll didn't contain much. Just a handful of carefully chosen lines, each one subtle, but pointed. For example, Hikaru's uncertainty about Kakashi's treatment in ANBU. And the line where he warned Kakashi that the Hokage's actions might be misunderstood. Minato Namikaze wasn't foolish. He was gentle and approachable, yes, but that didn't make him naive. From childhood, Minato had been exceptionally sharp. War had only further honed his judgment and instincts. Kakashi being sent on a mission the moment he entered ANBU, if that wasn't simply because his combat ability is outstanding, but instead meant what Hikaru implied, then it was a warning. A deliberate show of force aimed at Kakashi. Coupled with that line about misunderstanding the Hokage's actions, Minato's thoughts inevitably went deeper. He had only just taken office. In name, he was Hokage, but in reality, many things were still beyond his reach. ANBU, for instance. ANBU was one of the Hokage's core powers. Logically speaking, once the third stepped down, ANBU should have fully come under the fourth's command. And yet, all he had done was place Kakashi inside. No restructuring. No orders. No power plays. And still, this happened. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Minato suddenly realized the direction his thoughts were taking was dangerous. He forcibly cut them off. He glanced at the scroll in his hand, then subtly sensed the ANBU presence still concealed around the office. With a quiet sigh, he tucked the scroll away. Keeping it here would only invite unnecessary trouble. Fukami Hikaru, or rather, Senju Hikaru. That child is interesting. Hikaru had no idea what was happening in the Hokage's office. By now, he was already back in his room. It was time to seriously consider his next steps, how to extract greater benefits from what was to come. Truthfully, Hikaru had known for a long time that his future in Konoha held far more potential than anywhere else. The first reason was simple. Competition. Konoha's future decline was something he remembered all too clearly. The signs had already appeared back in the Kakashi and Sunin era. Some died. Some would defect. Some had already left the village behind. Even Jiraiya, in the end, didn't remain in Konoha. As for Minato's generation, true cage-level powerhouses were scarce. At most, there was Minato himself, and the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, his wife Kushina. Others, Higa Hayashi, Uchiha Fugaku, the Inoshika CH clan heads, were undeniably strong, each capable of holding a front on their own. But they were still just a step short of true cage level. Unless, of course, Fugaku really did possess the Manjiki Sharingan. Hikaru's own generation was better. Talents capable of standing on their own emerged one after another. But if he was being honest, in the future, aside from Kakashi, who somehow went 50-50 with everyone, and Might Guy, who nearly kicked the story to its ending, the rest fell short. They were elite Jonin. Kakashi and Guy, however, were cage level, or even beyond. Konoha's talent gap was inevitable. And for Hikaru, that gap was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He didn't believe that with more than a decade ahead of him, he wouldn't even reach cage level, especially with a cheat. His early years of planting trees had been painful, yes, but he'd already reached Jonin level strength. And he was certain of one thing. Once he entered Sage mode, he would be at least elite Jonin tier. And that was only beginner Sage mode. There were still intermediate and advanced stages. He even suspected there might be something like a complete or six-path state later on. Unfortunately, he didn't have those seeds yet nor the qualifications to plant them. But the future was wide open. Just the intermediate sage fruit alone would likely push him into quasi-cage territory. At the very least, his overall combat power would reach that level even if the duration was limited. Beyond that, there was still bloodline development. He didn't yet understand how to push that option further, but he wasn't worried. Whether it was basic attribute seeds, chakra nature seeds, sage seeds, or chakra capacity seeds, all of them came from plants, randomly extracted. Find plants more closely aligned with specific attributes, and the odds improved. Someday, he might even draw a seed that directly increased bloodline development. Strictly speaking, my real competitors are only Kakashi and Guy. Guy's a pure training maniac. He won't fight for power, he probably doesn't even realize such things exist. Otherwise, he wouldn't have rushed in like an idiot trying to save Sarutobi later on. As for Kakashi, Hikaru thought of Kakashi's future as the sixth Hokage. Frankly speaking, that position had practically been handed to him. Becoming Hokage wasn't about being outstanding alone. You had to be outstanding and acceptable to every major interest group. Kakashi, as Minato's disciple, had impeccable pedigree. He was on good terms with nearly all the Jonin of his generation, many of them were his classmates. The village's core combat strength supported him. And the old power center? It had conveniently been wiped out by a single 10-tailed beast bomb. With the upper ranks reshuffled, strong backing, and sufficient personal strength, Kakashi was naturally pushed to the front. And there was one more decisive factor. The two so-called saviors of the shinobi world were both his students. That path was reproducible. Hikaru even believed he could do it better. Of course, plans never unfold exactly as imagined. Still, it beat joining Akatsuki. Leaving aside the terrifying competitors, just the level of internal rivalry among its members was enough to make Hikaru's scalp tingle. If he went there now, he'd be delivering himself on a platter. At this stage, the priority is still improving strength, and gathering talent. Then steadily expanding the persona I've already built. Hikaru quickly made his decision. Strength meant planting trees, no shortcuts there. Talent recruitment, on the other hand, was a headache. But it had to be done. Coincidentally, he did know of a talent pool lying quietly in one place. He could try his luck there. But once he made contact, the future would become a lot more troublesome. Chapter 12, Flying Thunder God Technique. The group Hikaru had been thinking about really was trouble. If you asked which faction in Konoha produced the most talent, was more emotional than rational, and yet remained disliked by the village at large. No matter how you looked at it, there was only one answer. The Uchiha clan, Konoha's military police force. To be fair, the Uchiha were fertile ground. Their talent was absurd, almost unreasonable. But their situation was just as bad. Hikaru felt that if he got too close to them, he'd drag trouble onto himself as well. By now, the clan had already split internally. One side shouted about injustice and leaned toward using force to win recognition. The other believed violence solved nothing and wanted open negotiations, peaceful talks, honest dialogue. In Hikaru's eyes, neither path ended well. A war against Konoha? Konoha was weakened, sure, but how much power did the Uchiha really have right now? If his memory wasn't wrong, at this moment the Uchiha might not even have a single Mangeki Sharingan in hand. Even if there was one, it would only be Fugaku's. Yes, more Mangekyo would appear later, but two of those would be twisted and guided off course by washing and manipulation. And Fugaku's personality. Just look at Kanon. When the clan was slaughtered, he accepted death quietly, letting Ataka cut him down. So in terms of true cage level power, the Uchiha weren't even worth counting. And on the mid to low tier comparison? Even if Uchiha members were elite, Konoha's overall shinobi numbers were enormous. Add to that the way Hiruzen inherited Tobirama's anti-Uchiha strategy, he had already pushed the Uchiha into isolation. Plenty of people in the village hated them. This is an unequal war. No wonder Fugaku never dared to step forward. If he hadn't been cornered at the end, he would have kept enduring. Hikaru shook his head. As for peaceful negotiation, It wasn't impossible. But who, exactly, was willing to negotiate with them? The only person who might have accepted them, who could have actually sat down with them, was the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze. And Minato would die in the Nine Tails incident. The one man who represented hope to the Uchiha would vanish. After that, their future really was pitch black. Do I contact the Uchiha? Hikaru waited quietly. From the perspective of talent and potential, recruiting them would massively benefit his long-term goal. But right now, he was only an ANBU squad leader. And the Senju Uchiha relationship was what it was. In less than a year, once the fourth died, Hikaru would have even less foundation to draw them in. Headache. Step by step, I guess. If it comes to it, I'll just approach the two who'll enter ANBU in the future. Among the Uchiha who could enter ANBU, there were two names. Uchiha Shisui. Uchiha Itachi. To be honest, Hikaru's feelings toward them were lukewarm at best, mainly because of what they chose to do. That said, if you only looked at the village versus clan perspective, their choices weren't completely insane. They were shinobi, not policymakers. If anyone truly failed, it was Fugaku. Still, their worldview is warped. If they enter ANBU and haven't been fully reformed yet, maybe I can make contact. If they're already remade, forget it. Hikaru made his decision quickly. If he could harvest the Uchiha fertile field, he wouldn't let it go. But his access was limited and the will of fire was contagious. He had no desire to make life harder for himself. For years, whether at the academy or in ANBU, Hikaru had always presented himself as someone who perfectly embodied the will of fire. Whenever someone asked about his dream, his answer was always textbook. Protect the village. Strive to become Hokage. He never spoke about protecting a certain someone. In wartime, nobody trusted that bond's nonsense. Wartime had wartime policies. Peace had peace policies. If war was lost, the cost was unimaginable. That was why tragedies like Sakumo Hitaki's existed. Of course, it was also possible that Sakumo's prestige had crossed the line of what Sarutobi's system could tolerate. Sakumo didn't belong to Tobirama's master-disciple network. And public opinion had turned viciously against him. Rumor said even the people he saved hated him. How much of that was pushed behind the scenes was obvious. Because if Sakumo had truly risen, he would have been a fatal blow to the second-third Hokage's system. Hikaru wouldn't make that mistake. He wouldn't hesitate to finish the teammates who dragged him down. They ought to thank him for it. That was political correctness. That was how you survived. Knock, knock, knock. A sudden knock at the door snapped Hikaru back to reality. He remembered what the elder had said: there was a gift waiting for him. What kind of gift? He didn't know. He only knew that when members of their line reached a certain age, they could choose to learn specific techniques. The Senju had once been rich. Even if many techniques had been donated to Konoha for various reasons, the clan still kept backups. And some things had never been handed over at all. For example, senjutsu-related knowledge. The Senju definitely hadn't given that away. Konoha likely knew it, too. But Sage Mode was notoriously difficult. Jiraiya alone was proof. And Konoha also had to watch its table manners. If they ate too greedily, it would stir resentment, especially from other clans. That kind of mess wasn't worth it. Hikaru opened the door. A middle-aged man stood outside. His name was Usuji-gen, someone Hikaru knew well. The elder had raised Hikaru, but the fundamentals of shinobi training had largely been taught under Gen's guidance. Uncle General. Hikaru immediately put on his gentle smile and bowed slightly. The elder mentioned it. I didn't expect it would be you. I live close, Gen said with a smile. And I haven't seen you in a while. He patted Hikaru's shoulder, then flashed a mysterious grin. You know why I'm here. Take a guess, what did I bring you? More of the second Hokage's secret techniques. Hikaru blinked, uncertain. Back during training, he'd casually mentioned it once. Tobirama's techniques were the kind of thing shinobi dreamed about. Before Orochimaru, Tobirama was the shinobi world's greatest inventor, no joke. Even now, Tobirama's influence ran through the entire ninja world. Hikaru wanted them. Even one would be enough. The water release he'd been using wasn't secret, strictly speaking it was just high-power Sudden. Gen shook his head. What are you thinking? At your age, you only get to learn one. He handed over a scroll. Here. It's, well. Work hard. Work hard. Hikaru frowned, confused. But the moment he opened the scroll, he understood what Gen meant. Because written plainly on it were 4 characters that made his heartbeat stop. Flying Thunder God Technique. Chapter 13, Advantage. Why, is it this technique? Hikaru frowned at the scroll in his hand. His head felt swollen, like something heavy was pressing behind his eyes. Flying Thunder God wasn't a casual gift. It was the kind of technique that could smash through the bloodline ceiling outright. Just look at Minato Namikaze. Born a common shinobi with no Kekkei Genkai, yet after mastering Flying Thunder God, his battlefield performance eclipsed bloodline elites. He'd once erased 50 enemy shinobi in an instant, Jainin among them. That was how terrifying it was. And it was precisely because Minato existed combined with Uegakuer needing to watch for Kumigakuer's revenge on a second front that IWA chose to back down and accept peace. But this isn't something you just pick up. Hikaru sighed. As a senju, he'd asked the elder about Flying Thunder God when he was still small. The answer he received had nearly killed the idea on the spot. Simple. The difficulty is absurd. To learn this technique, you needed more than talent. You needed monstrous reflexes and extreme body coordination. Flying Thunder God was instantaneous space-time displacement, appearing at your mark and assassinating before the enemy even understood what happened. That meant your nervous system and balance had to be perfect. If your reactions weren't fast enough, you'd land and your brain wouldn't even catch up to your body. If your coordination wasn't good enough, you wouldn't even keep your footing. Forget a surprise attack, you'd trip, fall, or even crash directly into someone's blade. That wasn't ambush. That was suicide. Konoha had existed for nearly 50 years and already passed through multiple Hokage eras. Yet only 2 people had truly mastered Flying Thunder God. The long-dead second Hokage. And the current 4th who, in Hikaru's eyes, was almost being hollowed out politically. Minato had tried teaching it to others. He even came up with ways to split the technique and simplify it. In a sense, he succeeded. But it still didn't help. Genma, Raid, and Iwashi could perform the technique in a limited form, but they couldn't use it in real combat. Even as a pure transport method, it strained them. The requirements are just inhuman. After seeing Usuji Gen off, Hikaru returned inside, opened the scroll fully, and began to read. At least the first part, I barely qualify. My years of planting basic attributes weren't wasted. But the second part. Flying Thunder God didn't just punish the body. It punished your technical foundation even harder. Because it wasn't a normal ninjutsu at all. It was a finjutsu. The Flying Thunder God formula was, effectively, a mutated form of sealing arts. If you didn't understand sealing theory, you couldn't grasp it. And if your sealing control wasn't sharp, you couldn't place marks quickly or cleanly. People like to joke that Flying Thunder God was just throwing a kunai. But real usage was far more brutal than that. When an assassination failed, the user had to leave marks on the enemy's body silently, instantly, so they could return at any time. Just like Minato against Obito in the future, he planted the mark without a sound, then used it to land the decisive strike and sever Obito's link to the 9 tails. In short, it's a nightmare. Hikaru finished reading quickly, committing every detail to memory. Once he was sure he had it, he lit the scroll on fire. He watched it curl into ash, thin smoke rising in lazy spirals, and let out a low breath. Looks like I'll have to invest a lot more time into sealing arts. And into developing my own formula. Flying Thunder God was difficult, unreasonably so. But Hikaru had no intention of giving up. Because he wasn't like everyone else. He had a cheat. For him, the biggest hurdle wasn't mastery. It was simply the first successful, complete execution. His system's trait was simple: once he performed a technique properly one time, he could essentially fully master it afterward. It was a disgusting advantage. His Suten had been like that. The Doton he hadn't yet successfully used would likely be the same. That was how he, with only Chunin-level chakra, still possessed Jainin-level combat ability. This control, plus years of ANBU missions, had shaped him into something sharper than his numbers suggested. With this trait, Hikaru was confident he could master Flying Thunder God. He might even become more fluent with it than Tobirama or Minato. But before any of that, he needed sealing arts. He was Senju, and the clan still possessed a stockpile of Finjutsu scrolls. But Hikaru didn't believe he had much natural talent for it. Sealing arts weren't like ninjutsu. They were a different language entirely. A different system. A new world. He'd experimented with it in childhood, and gotten nowhere. So for a Flying Thunder God, I'll have to force it. And Kakashi is under my command now. If it comes to it. If it came to it, he'd have to use Kakashi. Use him to get an introduction. To visit the Hokage's wife. Uzumaki Kushina, a core member of the Uzumaki clan, and the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, was a sealing master by blood and by skill. Hikaru had no doubt her sealing knowledge was terrifying. Minato's Flying Thunder God itself probably carried traces of her influence. If Kushina taught him, Hikaru was certain he could gain the foundation he needed. He didn't even need much. Just the basics, enough to seal, and enough to shape and anchor a Flying Thunder God formula. With his cheat, once he could perform that much, he could refine it into combat-level usage himself. Self-research fits you best, Hikaru admitted inwardly. But right now, learning directly from the right teacher is better. And Kushina's ability is beyond doubt. He pictured the original story. Kushina suppressing the Nine Tails with sealing chains. Even at death's edge, with only the last scraps of her chakra, still helping Naruto complete the seal. Just imagining it made Hikaru's blood run hot. Kakashi's value was enormous. The help he could provide directly and indirectly was beyond imagination. Hikaru's earlier warning to Kakashi had been meant as long-term positioning, with a side of stirring tension between the fourth and third. Whether it worked or not, Hikaru hadn't even cared. But now, looking at the situation, he realized something. That move had value. Whether the effect turned out positive or negative was unclear. But, positive or negative, he could adjust from the shadows. That was his advantage. Chapter 14, Teammates. After resting at home for 2 days, Hikaru returned to ANBU on schedule. ANBU work was strange like that, busy to the point of suffocation, yet sometimes oddly relaxed when there were no missions or special assignments. You might run an operation today and be allowed to rest for several days. Then the next mission would come, and you wouldn't sleep properly for a week. So in ANBU, besides learning practical skills and memorizing endless intelligence, you also had to manage your time carefully. Hikaru did that well. His cheat helped, cutting down the time he wasted on pointless detours, but planning and studying were still necessary. In those 2 days, Hikaru had not only organized his next steps, some still vague, but at least forming a direction. He'd also forced himself to study sealing arts. He knew he had a long road ahead. But if he didn't push now, he'd have no chance at all. I'm not a genius, Hikaru admitted to himself. I'm just someone with special conditions on my side. So I have to work even harder. He understood his own talent level clearly. Without those strange fruits he'd cultivated to strengthen himself, he'd have died in ANBU long ago. Or been sent to the front lines as one more disposable body. The irony was bitter. The will of fire in Hashirama's era had been the founding purpose of Konoha, to protect children from war, to prevent young lives from being crushed in chaos. Yet in the Second and Third Shinobi World Wars under the Third Hokage's reign, countless children had still been thrown onto battlefields. That was the complete opposite of Konoha's original intent. Maybe it wasn't Sarutobi's wish. Maybe Konoha truly had been cornered. But the fact remained, it happened. If Hikaru hadn't had a little luck, if his family hadn't had a few connections, he wouldn't have escaped that fate either. Nightingale Captain. Morning. Morning. Hikaru smiled and greeted a few colleagues as he entered the ANBU compound. But soon his gaze caught on one figure sitting alone in the corner. Kakashi. Hikaru thought briefly, then walked over. If he wanted Kakashi to eventually introduce him to Kushina, then their relationship couldn't stay cold. Why are you sitting alone? Hikaru asked casually as he stopped beside him. Building relationships helps you in the long run. Captain. Kakashi lifted his head and answered flatly. Then, nothing. Hikaru didn't mind. He reached down, grabbed Kakashi by the arm, and pulled him up. Kakashi looked slightly puzzled, but he didn't resist. To him, Hikaru was his captain and his teacher wanted him to get along with Hikaru. Hikaru led him into the training room. Inside, several ANBU were running basic drills, simple movements to keep their bodies loose and ready. It was more than habit. ANBU missions weren't limited to outside the village. Work inside Konoha happened often too. And unlike missions beyond the walls, village operations rarely gave you time to prepare. Staying warmed up mattered. Captain. The moment Hikaru stepped in, Two ANBU jogged over and greeted him. They looked 17 or 18 tall and solid. It felt strange seeing them call a 13-year-old captain. But no one in ANBU considered it strange. Competition in ANBU was harsher than anywhere else. In wartime, promotions could come from battlefield merit and emergency appointments. In ANBU, there was no such generosity. Only strength and mission volume mattered. Brutal but efficient. Hikaru might have entered through connections, but his ability was real. And he'd spent 3 years earning that squad leader slot. I knew you two would be here. Hikaru smiled warmly, then gestured toward Kakashi. This guy, I'm sure you've heard of him. My old classmate. A real prodigy. He paused, then pointed back at the two ANBU at his side, still speaking gently. These two are Yaya and Shinichi. They've both saved my life before. Neither Yaya nor Shinichi had a surname. If they absolutely needed one, maybe Yakushi would fit best. They were both raised in an orphanage. Their parents had died in war so completely that no one could even trace their identities. They had no clan name, no family crest. Only a given name. It was their misfortune. But also their luck. At least they'd entered ANBU instead of route where humanity was ground away clean. Don't listen to the captain, Shinichi said, shaking his head. He saved the two of us. Then he nodded politely at Kakashi. My name is Shinichi. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. And I'm Yaya, the other added. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Compared to Shinichi and Yaya, Kakashi was polite but distant. His manners were correct, but there was no warmth. Still, he was new. No one took it personally. And Shinichi and Yaya likely already knew his background from files. Kakashi's coldness didn't surprise them. Of course, they weren't overly enthusiastic either. A man who had personally killed a teammate even in ANBU was someone you watched carefully. All right, Hikaru said, pleased that introductions were done. From now on, we're teammates. I don't know how long this lineup will last, but as long as we work together, we'll finish our missions cleanly. Yes, Captain. Yaya, Shinichi, and Kakashi replied in unison. ANBU teams weren't permanent. Sometimes they stayed together for years. Sometimes they broke apart overnight. A death in the field. A sudden transfer like Kakashi's. Anything could force a reshuffle. And ANBU's casualty rate wasn't low. The enemies they faced weren't ordinary. If you weren't discovered, you lived. If you were, coming home wasn't guaranteed. Hikaru nodded in satisfaction. He was just about to add a few more lines, something warm, something binding, something that would tighten the team. When a voice cut through the room. All units assemble. Chapter 15, Have you ever killed your own teammate? ANBU missions were always like this. You might be on standby, but you never knew when an assignment would drop. Nor would you know exactly what it was. Secrecy was absolute. Except for Kakashi, everyone in Hikaru's squad were veterans who had spent years in ANBU. They were already used to this rhythm. The previously crowded training hall emptied out in moments. Soon, every ANBU operative stationed at the compound had gathered in the front lounge. They stood silently, arranged by squad, without a single wasted movement. At moments like this, ANBU discipline showed itself in full. Everyone present. The battalion commander swept his gaze across the room before speaking coldly. There is an urgent mission. Target location, a border outpost in the northwest. Squad leaders will receive the detailed coordinates. Your objective is to intercept and eliminate all foreign shinobi attempting to attack the outpost. Remember all of them. Understood. Yes, battalion commander. Every ANBU answered in unison. Hikaru included. This kind of mission was nothing new. Especially after Konoha signed the peace treaty with Uegakuer, border raids like this had grown more frequent in just a few short months. Hikaru himself had carried out similar operations several times already. They weren't as clean as counterintelligence assassinations, but they weren't unfamiliar either. After receiving the preliminary orders, Hikaru prepared to move out. But just as he finished collecting the standard issue equipment with Kakashi and the others, the battalion commander stopped in front of him. Battalion commander, Hikaru said immediately, his posture straight and respectful. Nightingale. For this operation, you will once again execute the mission together with Kakashi alone. The commander's voice remained flat as his eyes shifted briefly to the other two. As for Grey Cat and Heron, you will be transferred to 2nd Battalion, 5th Squad and 9th Squad. You will serve as acting captains and are responsible for rebuilding those units. Understood? Yes, Battalion Commander. They answered without hesitation. Grey Cat and Heron were Shinichi's and Yaya's ANBU code names. The 2nd Battalion was another operational branch within ANBU. ANBU itself was divided into several departments: intelligence, interrogation, operations, reserves, and so on. Each department coordinated with the others and was further split into multiple small squads, none of them particularly large. The reserve department hardly needed explanation. It was ANBU's manpower pool and the place all newcomers were sent first. Recruits trained there until they were deemed qualified. Because of the war, Hikaru had only stayed there for a month before being pushed into active duty. In a sense, he'd graduated early. The operations department, however, was the second largest branch and the most important. It consisted of 3 battalions, each with more than 10 squads. Altogether, around 40 to 50 operatives. Every single one of them was elite. Even if their overall strength didn't quite reach Jonin level, each had at least one area where they matched or surpassed a Jonin. Congratulations, you two, Hikaru said with a warm smile once the commander left. I never thought I'd raise 2 captains. Captain, don't say it like that, Shinichi said awkwardly, then sighed. Looks like those 2 squads were completely wiped out. Yeah, Yaya added, rubbing his head. This one's going to be rough. Assigning new captains and rebuilding squads meant only one thing. The original teams no longer existed. Hikaru didn't know what kind of trouble the 2nd Battalion had run into, but the outcome was obvious. He let out a quiet breath. Neither Shinichi nor Yaya wanted to dwell on it either. With missions waiting, there was no time for more conversation. They soon parted ways. After collecting their gear, Hikaru led Kakashi straight out of the village. Sometimes, Hikaru wondered if he had a cursed tongue. He'd just said, I don't know how long we'll stay together. And now the team had already been split apart. Still, he didn't think much of it. To him, changing teammates wasn't a big deal. Over the years in ANBU, he'd seen plenty of turnover. Some died in missions. Some were reassigned to the front lines because experienced hands were needed. Others were transferred, just like today. He had never personally killed a teammate. At most, he had chosen to abandon certain teammates in order to complete the mission. Interestingly enough, that decision had never earned him punishment. On the contrary, because he was considered decisive and efficient, he'd eventually been promoted to squad leader. Shinichi and Yaya hadn't been with him long, only a few months. But Hikaru's gentle demeanor, solid strength, and calm judgment in combat had earned their complete trust. Among all the teammates he'd had over the years, they suited him best. Captain, about the squad being split. Once they were well outside Konoha's borders, Kakashi finally spoke. Hikaru glanced at him. The ANBU mask hid Kakashi's expression, but that hardly mattered. Even without it, Kakashi's face was always half covered. Still, the question made Hikaru raise an eyebrow slightly. It seemed that his earlier, probing words had had some effect after all. This time, though, Hikaru could tell it wasn't the battalion commander deliberately targeting Kakashi. Some things lost their effect when pushed too far. And squad wipes in ANBU weren't exactly rare. The commander wouldn't fabricate something like this, anyone could verify it with a single inquiry. Besides, Kakashi had the 4th Hokage behind him. Even if Minato couldn't fully control ANBU, securing a squad leader's post wouldn't be difficult. The squad needed manpower. We obey orders, Hikaru said with a faint smile. This kind of thing happens all the time in ANBU. I've lost count of how many teammates I've changed. You get used to it. So that's why. Kakashi turned to look at him. That's why you said you didn't know how long we'd be together. He hesitated, then suddenly asked. Captain, may I ask you something? Go ahead. Kakashi paused for a heartbeat. Have you ever, personally killed your own teammate? Chapter 16, I really envy you. Killed my own teammate, with my own hands. Kakashi's question made Hikaru pause. He hadn't expected something so blunt, so strange, and honestly, so rude. But after thinking for a beat, Hikaru understood why Kakashi would ask. ANBU work, by its nature, was cold. Unfeeling. Bloody. In the middle of a mission, eliminating a liability, even if that liability wore your own uniform, was not unthinkable. Just look at Kirigakure. Their ANBU had been known to kill their own companions to prevent intelligence leakage. Not one. Not two. All of them. And in most people's eyes, ANBU was ANBU no matter which village it belonged to. So Kakashi asking this wasn't surprising at all. After all, he had killed a teammate himself. Even if it had been an accident, the blood was already on his hands. A man like Kakashi didn't argue semantics. He didn't ask why his teammate chose that path. He only dug deeper into one conclusion. I did it. I'm sorry, Hikaru said softly. I'm not sure whether I count as someone who's done that. His voice stayed gentle, but it carried a vague, tired ambiguity like a sigh wrapped in politeness. You already know what ANBU work is like, or you wouldn't ask. And I know what happened to you. In ANBU, very few things stay secret. He slowed his pace slightly, gaze forward. But since you asked, I'll tell you something. It was around my third year in ANBU. We were assigned to steal intelligence from Iwagakure. At first, everything went smoothly. Then our luck turned. We got marked by Iwa's own Black Ops. They chased us down. By the end, only me and one teammate were left. And he was badly wounded. Hikaru spoke gently, and the edges of sorrow seemed to creep into his tone. That part was true. He wasn't making it up. But the emotion behind it. That was something Hikaru could control. If you were going to tell a story especially to someone like Kakashi, your delivery mattered as much as the words. Back then, that wounded teammate had begged Hikaru to finish the mission no matter what. And beyond that, he asked Hikaru to kill him. Dying to the enemy was humiliating. Being captured alive was worse than death. ANBU had ways to destroy their own bodies, yes, techniques that could melt everything down before interrogation. But the agony those methods caused was unimaginable. Better to die quickly. Better to die at a teammate's hand, someone who knew how to handle the body. Hikaru had hesitated for only a moment before refusing. Instead, he offered a different suggestion. Rather than die by my hand, Hikaru had told him back then, why not draw them off, and wait for reinforcements? That was what Hikaru truly meant. But the wounded teammate seemed to misunderstand it. He thought Hikaru was trying to push him to live. So he believed him. With his last chakra, he created a shadow clone, disguised it as Hikaru, and used it to lure the enemy away. The result wasn't pretty. Hikaru didn't go back for him. He reported it to the battalion commander. And the commander never attempted a rescue either. The matter ended there because everyone simply labeled the teammate as Kia. But a story could be told in many ways. Hikaru adjusted it just slightly, turning it into a narrative where the teammate made that choice on his own. And with that, the taste of the story changed completely. Honestly, Hikaru said, finishing, I probably should have killed him. With wounds that severe, he had almost no chance to survive. If I'd given him a clean end, at least I would have spared him the pain. He let the words hang, then turned his head toward Kakashi. Kakashi's mask hid his expression, but the exposed eye held something unfocused, lost, drifting. Hikaru's voice softened further, almost a whisper. Honestly, I really envy you, Kakashi. Me? Kakashi snapped back to attention, confusion flickering through his gaze. Yes. Hikaru nodded. I don't know what your exact situation was. I can't judge what you and your teammates were thinking in that moment. But you did something I couldn't. You're a hero. And you're brave. And Rin was too. For a swordsman, all it takes to swing the blade is courage. But for a shinobi, especially when that blade is turned toward a comrade, the weight you have to carry is far heavier than anyone understands. It sounded like praise. It sounded like comfort. And somehow, that made Kakashi feel even worse. He understood exactly what Hikaru meant. But he didn't know how to answer. He didn't agree with Hikaru's words, he shouldn't agree. Yet somewhere deep inside, he desperately wanted to. That contradiction churned inside him like ice water. Was what I did really wrong? Was what Rin chose really wrong? Kakashi couldn't find an answer. Worse, he didn't even know what kind of answer he wanted. Seeing Kakashi fall silent, Hikaru didn't push further. He'd already nudged the thoughts where Kakashi needed them to go. That was enough. The rest would take time. Still, Hikaru thought as they continued onward, for him to approach me like this. Was it his own choice, or did the fourth Hokage suggest something? If he was right, that made things interesting. At first, Hikaru had only wanted to stir a little smoke. But after receiving Flying Thunder God, his priorities shifted. He'd been uncertain whether his earlier move would bring good or bad consequences. But Kakashi's attitude now suggested one thing. The fourth Hokage didn't hold any hostility toward him. Then if I push a little more, maybe I can get Kakashi to do me a favor. Behind the mask, Hikaru smiled. His mood lifted noticeably. Still, I'll need to keep pressing. After we return, I'll have to maintain this connection. And also, his gaze flickered. And his system panel surfaced again, the familiar data-like display sliding into view. Hikaru sighed quietly. Chapter 17, The Power of Kage Who Takes the Blame. Name, Senju Hikaru. Gender, male. Birthday, Konoha calendar year 34, March 24th. Rank, Jonin, Chunin. Bloodline development, beginner, Senju's secret arts. Seeds. Jonin chakra capacity seed, 60% mature. Advanced earth release seed, 82% mature. Advanced earth release seed, 70% mature. Advanced water release seed, 70% mature. Fruits, none. Quest, become the true final boss of the shinobi world, unique. Only the advanced earth release seed went up, and everything else stayed the same. Staring at the panel, Hikaru could only sigh. He'd expected it, but it still felt frustrating. Sure, he was glad the Senjutsu seed had grown. But what he wanted most more than anything was for the Jonin chakra capacity seed to finish. His chakra pool was too small. Or rather, the amount of chakra he could actually use was too small. At this point, Hikaru didn't even know what his real chakra reserves looked like anymore. Because the 4 seeds in his body mid-tier and high-tier were greedy to the point of cruelty. He still remembered the early days. At first he could only plant 2 seeds. Then slowly, he managed 4. Then 8. He'd been happy for a while until he realized the problem. Not just the time cost. Not just how little chakra he had as a kid, split across too many seeds. The real problem was growth slowed to a crawl. And to this day, he still hadn't harvested a single advanced fruit. Worse, with his old planting habits, he had a strong feeling those seeds could have drained him dry. I don't want to end up like Guy. His basic attributes did make that path tempting, but Hikaru respected Guy. His character, his spirit, his strength. He did not respect Guy's aesthetics. More importantly, Hikaru had no intention of betting everything on taijutsu alone. He had the foundation to develop in multiple directions. Why trap himself in one? Still, if I'm counting it right, in half a year to a year, I should be able to harvest everything. Just imagining that one-time haul made Hikaru's heart rise. Because that wouldn't be a small upgrade, it would be a genuine leap. First, chakra. If his chakra finally reached true Jonin level, that alone would fix one of his biggest weaknesses. Second, intermediate senjutsu. More survivability, more insurance. This wasn't Naruto's later era, where cage-level monsters ran around like street dogs and Jonin felt cheap. Even if the cracks were starting to show, Obito already breaking the rules, several Mangekying lurking in the near future. With intermediate sage mode, Hikaru believed he could handle things far more comfortably. And then there were the advanced earth and water fruits. Those made him itch. Because once he had them, it meant a deeper understanding and tighter control of those chakra natures. Right now, his water and earth were still powered by intermediate fruits. Yet the techniques he produced were already frightening. Because he'd begun to grasp the shape change and nature change of those chakra types at a decent level. If those fruits advanced, that meant true mastery. It meant simplification. Maybe. Like Hashirama. One seal whatever jutsu you want, it comes. Hand seals? That was what lower tier shinobi did. A truly strong shinobi could compress the entire process into a single sign. And in real combat, standing still to weave seals was the easiest way to hand your enemy an opening. Unless you could force someone else to weave seals for you. Or you could form 5 seals in a second. Standing there was just volunteering to become a target. Hikaru had no intention of ever being the target. And he believed that day wasn't far. After that, the road was quiet. He and Kakashi kept moving, but didn't talk much. Kakashi was trapped in his own head, wrestling with what Hikaru had said. And Hikaru was busy with his own calculations, future routes, power planning, and the headache of sealing arts theory. By nightfall, they found a cave to rest in, planning to continue at dawn. Their destination lay around the border zones, the river country and the rain country. To be honest, Hikaru didn't want to go anywhere near that region. For one simple reason. Omegakure was Akatsuki's soil. If nothing had changed, Obito had already ensnared Nagato. And Nagato was building Akatsuki up. Kakuzu's existence alone proved it. Hikaru remembered this clearly. Dans, for reasons that always stank of special circumstances, accepted an invitation from Hans the Salamander to strike at Akatsuki. And they did it loudly. Hans even openly named Dan's affiliation. The result was a tragedy. Route was almost completely wiped out. It seemed only Dan himself crawled back to Konoha. And because of that disaster, the man who once dreamed of becoming Hokage, a man full of ambition, pivoted into supporting Orochimaru with absolute commitment. Then Orochimaru failed. Which meant Dan's gamble failed again. Worst of all, he couldn't even retaliate. His most important piece was nearly crippled, still rebuilding from the wreckage. Dan's plan didn't just cripple himself. It crippled Konoha, too. Akatsuki already hated Konoha. Jiraiya had managed to soften it over time. But Dan's. He piled new hatred on top of old. And Dan's hadn't just dragged himself and Konoha into a pit, he'd dragged Hans down with him as well. Dan's was protected by the village. He was a high-ranking Konoha figure. And because Nagato needed time to gather strength, they wouldn't move against Konoha's top brass too quickly. But Hans? Hans lived in the rain. He was right there. Head up, head down every day, same sky, same streets. If Nagato wanted someone's throat first, it was obvious whose. For now, it probably hadn't happened yet. Nagato still needed power. And Hans himself was terrifyingly strong. But even so, Nagato would have to be cautious around Hans. Meanwhile Hikaru? He was just an ordinary Konoha shinobi. If he blundered into that mess, there would be no caution. He would simply be erased. Dan's impact really was something else. Sometimes he wasn't just blamed for things he didn't do. A lot of the time, he genuinely deserved every ounce of that blame. Chapter 18, A Critical Moment. At a Konoha monitoring post near the tri-border where the land of fire met the land of rivers and the land of rain, the watch continued as it always had. The war was over. At least, in a certain sense, after more than a decade of bloodshed, the fires had finally begun to die down. For the shinobi stationed along the frontier, that was nothing short of a blessing. Because when war returned, the first ones to be crushed under the enemy's opening strike were always the border garrisons. Even now, peace didn't mean they could go home. Konoha's borders were still uneasy. But compared to the old days, it was safer. Captain, a young shinobi asked as he peered through binoculars from the watchtower. How much longer until your rotation? Border units rotated out regularly. Once your shift ended, you could finally return to Konoha, to family, to warmth, to something that felt like living. The middle-aged captain chuckled and shook his head. What, you're hoping to go back with me? Captain, we're on the same squad, the young man said with a grin. Of course it's normal we'd go back together. The captain clapped him on the shoulder. Sounds like you're thinking about Nobuko. So? When are you two getting married? Captain. The younger shinobi protested, clearly embarrassed. Laughter spread across the tower. War's end had loosened everyone's hearts. If this were still wartime, no one would have said things like that. Back then, they didn't even know if they'd see the sunrise. The post felt lively. But it didn't last. Captain. Someone shouted suddenly from another vantage point. 3 squads are approaching from the west. The captain's expression tightened, but he kept his voice steady. Can you tell which village they're from? The shinobi adjusted his binoculars, staring hard. From the uniforms and forehead protectors, they look like IWANIN. But Captain, why are they coming from that direction? This side. I know what you mean, the captain cut him off. Everyone, stay alert. But remember this, we absolutely do not strike first. Understood. He'd already sensed something was wrong based on their approach route. But caution mattered more than instinct. Konoha and Uegakure had signed a ceasefire agreement. If Konoha struck first, it could be interpreted as tearing up the treaty. Even if these Iwanin were imposters, he couldn't gamble on it. If they were real and he attacked first, it would be political suicide. Even if it didn't restart the war, he'd be punished severely. Yes, Captain. Watch out. The captain's eyes widened. Several kunai were already flying toward them. His warning came a split second before impact. Some of the Konoha shinobi drew kunai in time and knocked the projectiles away. Others didn't even manage that. They raised their binoculars as crude shields. And in that moment of chaos, the Iwanin surged into the monitoring post and attacked outright. What are you doing? The captain charged forward immediately, intercepting one attacker with a kunai and shouting as he blocked. Are you trying to destroy the peace between Konoha and Iwa? But the enemy didn't answer. Their strikes only became more vicious. And in that instant, the captain understood. These were not real Iwanin. Worse. Their strength wasn't overwhelming, but their numbers were several times the garrison's. They'd launched a surprise assault and seized the initiative. Within moments, Konoha's defenders were bleeding. And in this kind of fight, there was no chance to send a distress signal, no time to break away and contact the main camp for reinforcements. At this rate, we're finished. He kicked one attacker away, but more poured in. Fewer men meant being surrounded from every angle. Normal shinobi didn't have Sharingan. Unless you were strong enough to dominate the entire field, being outnumbered like this was suffocating helpless. The captain blocked another strike, then swept his gaze across the post. His men were still alive. But they were all injured. The young shinobi who teased him earlier had taken a kunai to the chest, blood blooming from the wound in a steady flow. Thank the heavens it hadn't pierced something vital. Otherwise he'd already be dead. But if this continued, death was only a matter of time. None of them would make it out. Is this where it ends? The captain parried a lethal blow and tried to move to the young man's side. And then a pain like tearing fire exploded across his back. A kunai had punched through him from behind. His strength began leaking away. The agony made his vision blur at the edges, his thoughts slipping. Death was terrifying, especially when you still had things you hadn't let go of. He forced himself to swing at the attacker behind him, but the twist only sent fresh agony through his body. His movement slowed. His counterattack was weak, barely even a threat. And because he faltered, another enemy landed a hit. A kunai sliced across his waist. Blood spilled out in a rush. The captain's legs gave way. He crashed to the ground. His fingers still clenched his kunai so tightly his knuckles went white. But he couldn't rise. His vision dimmed further, and the world became a smear of shadows. So that's it. Nobuko, looks like I won't be coming back to you. A long, quiet breath escaped him. The enemy's kunai drew closer. The captain bit down hard. Even if he died here, he wouldn't let them walk away unharmed. And then, a kunai glowing with blue light tore through the air. A sharp whistle, a flash. And it buried itself in the enemy's chest. Chapter 19, just in time. Hikaru and Kakashi rested properly for the night, then set off again at first light. But Kakashi kept stealing glances at Hikaru. In the second half of the night, when Kakashi woke up to take over watch, he'd clearly seen it. Hikaru was reading a sealing arts scroll. Finjutsu wasn't something ordinary shinobi could casually get their hands on. It wasn't just rare, its difficulty was on another level. Kakashi could understand how Hikaru might obtain it. He was a veteran ANBU operative, with enough merit, accessing uncommon materials wasn't impossible. Still, learning sealing arts wasn't something you did on a whim. Even with references in hand, the number of people who could truly grasp it was painfully small. In every village, anyone proficient in sealing techniques was considered elite. Even if their combat strength wasn't impressive, they'd still be assigned to a sealing unit and protected carefully. Just look at the barrier seals each village used to detect infiltrators. Those systems alone proved how valuable a Finjutsu specialist was. Sure, against monsters strong enough to brute force their way through, those seals might feel flimsy. But at the very least, they gave warning. Captain, Kakashi asked on the road, unable to hold it in, are you interested in sealing arts? More or less. Hikaru nodded. I've always been interested, actually. Unfortunately, my talent in it seems flawed. But I'm not planning to give up. Is that so? Kakashi pressed his lips together, as if thinking of something. All right, enough about that. Hikaru smiled and shook his head. Let's move. We still have a mission. If we arrive late, it'll get ugly. Kakashi fell quiet. Their mission mattered more. But he still filed away the detail. Hikaru wanted to learn sealing arts. For most people, Finjutsu was difficult and unreachable. Kakashi was different. In the future, he would have a decent grasp of it. When Sasuke was branded by Orochimaru, Kakashi was the first to suppress the curse mark with a seal. And Kakashi had the right foundations. His teacher was Minato Namikaze. His teacher's wife was Kushina Uzumaki, the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. If anyone had access to that world, it was Kakashi. They moved fast. Another day and more passed before they reached the borders of the Land of Fire. Fire Country was vast, even shinobi needed days to cross it. Fortunately, they weren't escorting civilians, and they weren't marching with an army. 2 operatives could travel light and cut corners. After arriving, they didn't head straight for the main outpost. Instead, they surveyed the surrounding area first. ANBU and border garrisons were different systems. To avoid messy handovers and for secrecy, ANBU typically didn't make direct contact unless necessary. More importantly, garrison units could be compromised. If there was infiltration, their presence leaking would mean the mission itself became dangerous. Reducing risk was ANBU's job. They circled the border perimeter and checked several monitoring towers near the outpost. Hikaru nodded. No abnormalities. The area was quiet, dangerous terrain on paper, but calm in reality. Looks all right, Kakashi said after scanning the surroundings. But isn't there one tower we haven't checked yet? Yet. Hikaru nodded. Let's go. Once we finish that one, we can rest for a bit. Each monitoring post was set at a different position, but all were arranged in a ring around the outpost with clear sight lines. If the outpost was attacked, as long as the enemy wasn't overwhelmingly strong or too numerous, the garrison could fire signal flares and call for help. But if ANBU had been deployed, it meant the attackers might not be few. Mid-stride, Hikaru's brows drew together. His senses caught chakra disturbances in the distance. His perception had always been sharp. He didn't have to strain to pick up movement. And this fluctuation was violent active combat. Which meant the last tower had likely already been hit. Speed up. Combat ready. Hikaru's voice turned crisp. We've got trouble. There are probably a lot of them. Yes, Captain. Kakashi didn't question it. He already knew Hikaru had excellent sensory ability. He didn't know how deep it went, but it was trustworthy. Their pace jumped instantly. As they ran, both began prepping weapons and tools. Soon, they could see it with their own eyes. On a tall watchtower ahead, more than a dozen shinobi in Uegakuru's signature red were assaulting Konoha defenders. IWANN. Kakashi frowned. So they're disguising themselves on purpose to sabotage the peace treaty. Obviously, Hikaru replied evenly. Everyone can tell what this is. In the end, it comes down to profit. Interests. Interests. Kakashi's brows furrowed. He didn't fully understand what Hikaru meant. But there wasn't time to ask. Because they were close enough now to see the Konoha garrison breaking under pressure. And then, Hikaru suddenly drew a kunai. In the next instant, powerful water release chakra gathered along the blade. Kakashi's eye flicked wider. The water chakra grew denser, then began compressing and spiraling with frightening speed. And then, abruptly, it went still. But the water no longer felt like water. It felt sharp. Like a blade. Like pressure honed to a point. Even Kakashi felt his scalp prickle. That's chakra-shaped transformation and nature transformation pushed to a ridiculously high level. Kakashi thought. Hikaru's arm snapped forward. The kunai launched with a violent screech of air friction. A whistling streak of compressed killing intent. Driving straight toward an enemy's chest. Chapter 20, Godspeed. The kunai infused with Hikaru's chakra slammed straight into the chest of one of the IWANN. It didn't just pierce him, it ripped through, tearing open his torso and carrying a spray of blood as it continued forward toward the man behind him. Damn it! Another shinobi in Uegakure attire cursed loudly, instantly raising his blade to block. But in front of that faintly blue-glowing kunai, his defense was laughably fragile. The moment steel met steel, cracks spread across his sword like a spider web. In the next heartbeat, the blade snapped cleanly in half. If not for a nearby companion reacting fast enough yanking him sideways, the kunai would have punched straight through his chest. The middle-aged Konoha captain was still dazed. 1 second earlier, death had been unavoidable. The next, the situation had flipped completely. The whiplash was intense, but he was still a shinobi. Even gravely wounded, even shaken, this was no time to collapse and watch. He forced himself upright and swept his gaze over his subordinates, a bitter sigh escaping him. 3 men. A standard cell. 1 already dead. The other 2 including himself badly injured. Still, he thought grimly, reinforcements are here. The next moment, 2 figures dropped in front of him. Black and white armor. White animal masks. Both with pale hair. They looked young, but the chakra radiating from them made the captain's heart tighten. ANBU. He realized. And not ordinary ones. Hikaru didn't spare him a glance. He took in the battlefield in a single sweep, then calmly drew his blade. Kakashi stood beside him, silent and alert, making no move to attack, clearly waiting for orders. That alone made Hikaru inwardly nod in approval. In the original timeline, Kakashi in ANBU had been infamous for ignoring commands, killing targets even when ordered to stand down. The fact that he waited now meant one thing. He trusted Hikaru. That was good. Leave 1 or 2 alive, Hikaru said evenly. Kill the rest. Yes, Captain. Kakashi's reply was cold and sharp. In the next instant, he vanished in a streak of lightning, charging straight into the enemy ranks as arcs of electricity crackled around his wrist. Hikaru moved at the same time. A single body flicker, and he was already beside one of the IWAnin, his blade flashing out without hesitation. His speed was terrifying. Years ago, the countless base attribute fruits he'd cultivated had reshaped his body beyond normal limits. Combined with his mastery of body flicker, his movement was so fast it left no afterimage at all. Slash! A spray of blood. With one clean cut, the enemy's head flew free. Before anyone could react, Hikaru pivoted, his blade howling through the air as it carved toward another target. Now the IWAnin finally reacted. Several rushed him at once, but by the time they moved, Hikaru had already killed again. His sword slid across a throat, precise and controlled, severing the artery in a single stroke. Blood splashed past the edge of his mask. In the same motion, he twisted, catching a surprise strike on his blade while multiple kunai screamed toward him from different angles. Hikaru didn't panic. The moment the kunai struck, his body dissolved into smoke. A log dropped to the ground. Substitution, watch out! One of the enemies shouted. Too late. Behind him, chakra surged. Water release, water dragon bullet. What? Using water release without a water source. A massive dragon of water formed instantly, roaring as it slammed into the cramped monitoring post. Boom! The tower couldn't withstand the onslaught. As it collapsed, Hikaru snatched the wounded captain and another severely injured Konoha shinobi, pulling them clear. The last surviving defender was less injured. Hikaru ignored him. Landing smoothly, Hikaru flicked several kunai to suppress the enemy's advance, then formed seals again. Water release, exploding water dragon. A violent whirlpool erupted from the ground. Several IWAnin who hadn't yet regained their footing were flung skyward as the vortex rose, condensing more and more water. Until, more than 10 meters up, it shaped itself into a massive water dragon. The dragon roared. Then crashed down. At least 3 enemies were crushed outright, their bodies swept away by the impact. 2 others barely managed to evade, but the floodwaters surrounded them, forcing them to stand on the water's surface to continue fighting. They looked uncomfortable. Not used to fighting near water. Hikaru observed, brow lifting slightly. That narrowed things down. Few shinobi struggled this badly in such terrain, but those from the land of wind or the land of earth often did. By now, Hikaru had a pretty good idea where these people actually came from. 2 enemies remained. 1 was already enough. Living captives were far more valuable than corpses. Interrogation could extract things no amount of post-mortem analysis ever could. Only when capture was impossible did ANBU settle for heads. Hikaru gauged his chakra reserves and quietly exhaled. Strong in every area, except one. Chakra's still not enough. But, he thought calmly, lowering into a forward stance while his left hand formed seals behind his back. That's fine. Because this ends now. Water release, water flash. His remaining chakras surged violently. In the blink of an eye, Hikaru vanished. When he reappeared, it was directly behind one of the enemies. The man didn't even realize what had happened. Only when a sharp pain blossomed across his neck did his vision begin to fade. As consciousness slipped away, a single thought echoed in his mind. So fast.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.